My wife cheated and proposed an open marriage to keep her affair going, so I ended it walked away. I gazed at my wife of 5 years and declared, "Aaron, it's either him or me, no middle ground." She sat beside my supposed boss, Plato Giannis, grasping his well-groomed hand, until I spoke. As I uttered those words, she withdrew her hand, confusion and fear etching her beautiful face. She shook her head in surprise, causing her blonde hair to gleam in the lamp. "Just for the weekend, come Monday, everything returns to normal. Can't you enjoy some time with Elle for now?"
Elle is Elle Logan, real name Ellen Johnson, now seated next to me.
She has been fervently trying to seduce me for the past few hours. A striking woman with luscious dark hair and one of the most enviable bodies globally, especially if you appreciate curves, which I certainly do. Rumors also circulate that she's top-notch. It's all part of Plato's jest. When Aaron and I were invited to this for a weekend, the assumption was he wanted to familiarize himself with me better. I'm a renowned author, and he acquired the publishing company that released my work about 3 months ago. However, the entire weekend was actually orchestrated for PL to have relations with my wife. I'm an average writer, penning detective novels and thrillers featuring my protagonist, Rick Rocker. He unravels mysteries of locked rooms and takes daring leaps off cliffs to elude lunatics. His bed life is diverse and exciting, effortlessly charming beautiful women, a martial arts expert and trained assassin. He's a jack of all trades. He's a fantasy wrapped in a thin layer of reality. And my books sell reasonably well, though the publishing house boasts several more significant and better-selling authors. I only have a captivating wife who caught Plato's attention. They crossed paths at a grand dinner and dance organized by Mr. G for his group of writers and editors. The event made an impression on Aaron, especially when she danced with Mr. G to multiple musical numbers. Polished and a decade senior to year-old Aaron, he possessed long dark hair and a commanding presence. Observing their dance, I noted his adept movements. When the group took a break, they returned to our table and Mr. G expressed admiration for Aaron, stating that she danced beautifully. I merely nodded, and my lack of response momentarily puzzled him. He then mentioned attending to other guests, saying it was a pleasure. Aaron smiled and reciprocated with Plato. I scrutinized her, noting the swift transition from Mr. G to Plato. I inquired if she was impressed with my boss, to which she replied positively, accompanied by a lascivious grin. I suggested, "Let's see whose wife he manages to snag, huh?" She turned out to be the wife of one of the editors, and during the evening, 3 more revealed they were editors' wives. All of this unfolded a month ago. I am Donald Lake, and I have no nickname. Standing at about 6 feet and weighing 169 lbs, I have curly brown hair, blue eyes, and am 30 years old. I am in good physical shape and athletic. Aaron, too, is in good shape and practices fencing, a sport of skill and coordination. It was at a fencing lesson she taught that I first met her. I was conducting the usual research for Rick, who was to engage in sword fights in the next book. The adventurer, I always undertake extensive research before writing an adventure book, a key selling point of mine. Rick doesn't do anything I haven't tried. My journey to becoming a writer was an ascent up a steep staircase. I graduated from high school and did not pursue formal education thereafter. In fact, since I was 10, I recognized myself as a writer. Throughout school, I penned story after story, with 2 published in obscure literary magazines during high school. Despite considering myself a serious writer, the need to work for a living arose after finishing school. I worked as a car mechanic, which I enjoyed. However, it didn't pay much, prompting me to start writing thrillers. Miraculously, one sold, followed by another and another. My current publisher signed me after receiving my first Rick Rocker novel. Sally Baker became my editor, and we quickly found common ground. A sweetheart, but deeply married. She had elementary school-age children. While working on the second Rocker book, I met Aaron. I completed the book after receiving advice from her about a sword duel, and our professional relationship evolved into several dates, eventually leading to closeness. Our connection was immediate, and we both were delighted. At the time, Aaron operated her music store, surviving the initial stages of starting a business thanks to loans from a family trust. The store featured various instruments in one section and recordings of diverse music, along with sheet music in the other. So, fencing is just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23, and I was as happy as I thought it was possible to be. We had plans for children, and very soon. But my publishing house was sold to Mr. G, or Plato as Aaron calls him. One day, Aaron came home excited, mentioning that next weekend, Plato had invited us to his island. I stared at her, questioning why she was telling me instead of him. Erin explained that she ran into him last week, had lunch, and gave him a tour of the store. Today, he called with an invitation, expressing his desire to get to know the writers better. Erin suggested he would be in contact with me soon. Curious, I asked if he had been in contact with her and others. She reassured me, denying any inappropriate contact. I insisted on knowing why she didn't mention the lunch and shopping until today, and she admitted that he had made advances, but she blew him off. She kept quiet, thinking I might get in trouble given his ownership of the company. Now, with my apparent enthusiasm for the island visit, Erin disclosed that it would be just the two of us and a special friend of his, along with the staff, to get to know us better. I remarked cynically about his intentions to get to know everyone. Erin reassured me, stating that she could handle the situation and questioned if I was sure I could handle it. I assured her that everything would be great. However, I firmly declared my decision to decline the invitation, deeming it too dangerous for us. Erin pleaded for reconsideration, expressing that we would have fun, but I remained resolute, apologizing for my decision. She sulked for the rest of the evening. The next day, I called the main office and requested to speak with Mr. G. He returned my call 15 minutes later, expressing anticipation for our weekend on the island. I declined, stating my discomfort. I mentioned that it seemed my wife knew about it before me, having had lunch with him, and she didn't inform me initially. According to her, he had been pestering her, and she was concerned about my reaction if I knew everything. He acknowledged his appreciation for Erin on various levels, citing her attractiveness and entrepreneurial qualities. He also mentioned my status as one of his most profitable writers. He claimed a desire to get to know both of us better. Despite his efforts, I maintained my stance, apologizing and asserting that it would not work. Disappointed, he expressed regret and stated that he wished I would change my mind. He mentioned keeping the weekend open. At that point, we parted ways. About 3 hours later, as I finished the next Rick book, my agent, Brock Levan, contacted me. I inquired about how he knew about my declining Mr. G's invitation. Brock explained that the vice president of sales had called him, insisting that I should attend. He conveyed the potential consequences of under-advertising the new book, which would be detrimental to both of us financially. I questioned if there was a direct threat, and Brock clarified that while not explicit, the threat was implied, emphasizing that Mr. G played a tough game. I assured Brock that I would be in touch. After ending the call, I emailed Sally the conclusion of the new book, along with some instructions. Later, she called, and we discussed the situation. In the meantime, I delved into researching Plato Yanis and his island. The island was named Hedonism, meaning pleasure in Greek, essentially Pleasure Island. As I delved deeper, I uncovered numerous stories of coital misconduct on the island, including 2 divorce cases where the island was cited as a factor. However, these stories were published in gossip sources. Several photographs of Mr. G with women, including 2 married ones, raised serious concerns for me. I located a picture of the place on Google Maps and familiarized myself with the entire layout. Situated off the coast of North Carolina among islands popular for golf and beach holidays, this 2-mile-long and approximately 1-mile-wide island faces south and is shielded from the elements. It boasts 2 piers, multiple buildings, including a large house, tennis courts, and a swimming pool, leaving me puzzled about the need for a pool with great beaches around. I downloaded detailed photos and compiled them into a topographic map, concluding that a decent boat or seaplane would be necessary for the journey. Lacking both, I know people who possess them. On that Friday evening, Erin returned home promptly, appearing joyful for dinner. I had a substantial chicken salad in white. As Erin changed, she mentioned hearing that I might have reconsidered not going to the island. I looked at her, remembering Peel's mention of changing one's mind at lunch. She clarified, "No, silly, he's in New York and we're here in good old Virginia." He called me, mentioning his apartment in Milan. Questioning how she knew he was in New York, I was met with a dismissal of paranoia. Erin explained that Plato suggested ordering his plane from the national airport if we agreed to go, but reiterated that I hadn't changed my mind. Frustrated, Erin called me stubborn and suggested she could go alone, but I expressed concerns about enjoying myself and fearing potential divorce. I inquired about the possibility of her sleeping with him, to which Erin responded that she wouldn't go without me. I questioned how I could let her go alone, emphasizing potential consequences upon her return and the risk of our relationship being jeopardized. Erin affirmed her attraction but assured me that we were still passionate and she wouldn't take the risk. Believing her, I asked if she believed it. To which she replied, not to believe her at all, acknowledging that my trust was almost empty. An accidental spill of wine during this conversation led to laughter, hugs, and kisses, culminating in a trip upstairs lasting an hour. The unpleasant topic faded. As we lay in bed, Erin asserted she wouldn't risk our relationship for a billionaire, seemingly assuming that we would go to the island. Erin commented that it was decided. Tensing but not elaborating further, I inquired about her eagerness for the trip, urging her to provide the truth. After a moment of silence, she explained that it seemed exciting to communicate with such an important and influential person. She quickly clarified that she didn't mean be with, but rather communication. Reflecting on the situation, I noted that he was born into wealth and significantly increased his fortune, having a substantial head start. Similar to me, he pursued relationships with women. Despite my concerns, Erin affirmed her belief that everything would be good and fun, considering that we were on the verge of trying for children. I recognized that this could be a potential time for Erin to stray, doubting her honesty. I reluctantly agreed to the trip, warning Erin that if she ended up with this guy, it would be irreversible. She acknowledged the warning, expressing her gladness about the decision. Deciding that this warning was my last, I saw it as a test of her worthiness as a wife. Temptation would reveal the truth, and time would be the judge. The following day, I accepted the invitation and made contingency plans with my friend. I also checked the island's cellular communication availability. It was there, still. As a precaution, I brought my satellite phone. The small plane from the national airport landed at a small airport, greeted by a man named Simon. He took us to the pier, where we boarded a boat with a comfortable cabin and a powerful engine, driven by another man, Charlie. After about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Erin and I spent time exploring the ocean and other islands. Simon briefed us on our location and island activities. He was a friendly, muscular guy with a wonderful smile and laugh, larger than me. Approaching the north side pier with Erin leading the way, Simon commented that I didn't seem very happy with the trip and suggested calling me Don. I acknowledged having doubt, considering Simon's 6 years of working for Mr. G, expecting him to understand my reservations. When Simon inquired about why I came if I was so worried, I explained it was to see what happens. I also asked if he was Mr. G's bodyguard, to which Simon confirmed, mentioning his presence was just a precaution, although Mr. G was capable of handling himself. Curious about Simon's preparedness, I asked if he was armed. Simon mentioned having a knife but clarified that weapons were not allowed on the island. Expressing my distrust of the island's rules, I admitted to not being a very trusting person these days. Simon assured me that no firearms were needed, emphasizing that I wouldn't require one, no matter what happened. The boat pressed tightly against the pier, and Simon, along with a young man on the pier, secured it. Erin received Simon's hand, and I disembarked from the boat, noticing Simon's slight worry. Following Simon's direction, I accompanied Erin toward the substantial house. Upon our arrival, Mr. G greeted us, dressed casually in swimming trunks and a sleeveless shirt. Ella, considered the most beautiful woman in the world, accompanied him. I observed her, discovering who else would join us. It became apparent that she was Helen Johnson from Jonestown, the semi-official mistress on the island and in several houses owned by Mr. G. Though she was once seen in the company of other noblemen, it occurred less frequently now. Mr. G seemed to have secured an exclusive agreement, at least in some way. Mr. G extended his hand to shake, Ella hugged Erin, and then Mr. G embraced both Erin and Ella. She smelled delightful during the hug, and her lips touched my ear. We were escorted to a large room and offered drinks. Despite the one afternoon timing and a light plain snack, a small buffet awaited us. Opting for sparkling water, I abstained from drinking, while Erin chose wine. They both sampled a small selection from the buffet. During this, Mr. G inquired about the new book I had sent to Sally the previous week. Assuring him it was on schedule, Mr. G complimented my punctuality with a smile. Ella, having read all my books, expressed anticipation for the thriller involving rock climbing, flying small planes, and a love interest. She exclaimed, "Cannot wait. Maybe I can watch it sooner." Mr. G supported this idea, turned to Erin and inquired about the music business. After Erin's positive response, I humorously mentioned Marjorie's new book, predicting it would sell well. Marjorie, known as Marjorie Wright, wrote serious fiction but still sold a lot of books. Mr. G revealed Marjorie's rising sales and reminded me of my obligation for another book, to which I affirmed my ongoing work on a Christmas-themed mystery. Elle suggested moving on and proposed going for a swim. Mr. G promptly stood up, encouraging us to join him, and ran out the door. Elle mentioned that if we had swimsuits, she would show us to our room to change. The three of us stood up, and Ella led us into a large double bedroom, closing the door behind us. In the room, we changed into swimsuits. I opted for regular trunks, while Erin chose a skimpy pink bikini. I expressed my opinion that the situation was excessive and questioned who Erin was trying to impress. She responded that she just wanted to look good, mentioning Elle's beauty. I countered, telling her she was no less beautiful. Though she disliked my tone, Erin refrained from responding. Upon descending, Ella wore an electric blue bikini, similar in size to Erin's. I found both of them entirely enamoring. Exiting, we walked to the south side beach on a wooden path. Mr. G was already in the water, swimming behind the breakwaters. Erin conveyed her reluctance to swim that far, a sentiment shared by Ella, who shuddered. Despite this, I dove into the surf, swam to where Mr. G was, using his crawl, and joined him. He was a proficient swimmer for his size, easily matched by my water-friendly body type. Sometimes changing strokes, we swam until he tired, and I followed him back to shore. As we approached, a large wave knocked him off his feet and I picked him up. He spat out seawater and sand, and I held him tightly as we walked out. His legs seemed like wet noodles, likely from overextending himself in our swimming competition. Quickly regaining composure, he pulled away, stating that he was fine and the wave had taken him by surprise. Approaching the sunbathing women, I inquired who wanted to swim. Ella immediately stood up, her top slipping slightly as she raised her hand. Both of us ran to the surf. Erin declined, so I pursued Ella. The rear view was impressive. She dove in like an Olympian, swimming beyond the breakwaters. I followed her, amazed at her superior swimming compared to Mr. G's. Swimming alongside for a distance, she suggested, "Let's turn," which I did. Intrigued by the glimpse of flesh, I let her get about 4 meters ahead, observing her from the side. She turned over, floated on her back, and her chest swayed in and out of the water. An absolutely amazing woman. Given my proficiency in backstroke, I joined her, swimming alongside until she declared, "I've had enough," and swam back to the shore. Pausing briefly to glance at her from behind, upon surfacing from the waves, Erin and Mr. G were nowhere in sight. But my attention shifted to my snug swimming trunks. She joked about me being Superman, and I chuckled, suggesting there was only one way to find out. Taking a step toward me, she halted, stating that we couldn't do this here, no matter how much she wanted it. With that, she turned and ran. On land, she couldn't match her speed in the water, allowing me to easily catch up, and we proceeded to the veranda. Hours were missing, leaving me to ponder if this had already transpired. Ella inquired about my profession, asking if I really wrote. Confirming, I explained how I aimed for believability in Rick's actions. Ella stared momentarily, diminishing my hardness, but as expected, it returned. She possessed a commanding presence. I firmly told Elle to back off, emphasizing my marital status and expressing a desire to keep it that way. I asked her as a favor not to pursue anything further. Elle laughed, labeling me a tongue-tied writer. I muttered, "Oh my God," and suggested checking on Erin and Mr. G. I asked if it mattered to her, and she expressed interest, to which I replied, "Oh yeah, please." I then conveyed to Elle that I wanted her to understand I wouldn't be sleeping with her over the weekend. I explained that whatever Erin decided to do, if they reached that point, I would leave. I acknowledged that I would likely long regret what I had just said, all while smiling. As Elle warned me that it wasn't easy to shake her off her tail. She entered the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. When I went upstairs to change clothes, I found no one. However, upon entering our room, I heard the shower running, which abruptly stopped as soon as it registered. No voices. Erin opened the door, wrapped in a towel. She gasped upon seeing me and asked if Elle had already gotten to me. I assured her that Elle hadn't and explained that I wasn't going with her. I expressed hope that Erin wouldn't go with Mr. G either, reminding her that we had discussed the situation earlier. I inquired about what they had been doing while Elle and I were swimming. Erin informed me that Mr. G showed her around, pointing out the swimming pool, tennis court, and gym downstairs. She emphasized that there was no relationship activity involved. I acknowledged my belief that Mr. G wouldn't engage in such risky behavior, considering they didn't know how long Ella and I would be gone. And I suspected they had been watching us during our swim. Erin concurred, describing Mr. G as a gentleman. However, she expressed concern that sooner or later he would come for me. I admitted to the likelihood and added that Elle would come for her as well. Erin grinned, saying it wasn't very comforting, but assured me that she wouldn't give in, emphasizing that I shouldn't either. We discussed our plans for the evening, with Erin declaring that we had time for love after drinks and snacks at 5. She dropped the towel, and I admitted I was still on edge because of Elle. We engaged privately with genuine zeal, only realizing afterward that the windows were open. Erin remarked that it didn't matter, stating that they were married. Glancing out the window, Ella sat on a sun lounger about 6 meters away. She looked up, smiled, waved her hand, and then reached for her shorts. I distanced myself from the window. Erin noticed my renewed arousal and fixed her gaze on me. Glancing out the window, she remained entranced for a while. A groan emanated from outside. Erin turned to me exclaiming, "Oh my God, Donnie, forget about yourself. She can have me. I can give up on you. I will not give up." Erin teased that I had to beg Elle to give up, claiming it was the only chance I had. I mentioned that I had already tried begging, but it didn't seem to work. I speculated that Plato had given Ella a task so he could have me, finding the situation strange but admitting it kept my interest. I promised Erin that I wouldn't give in to Ella's advances, expressing gratitude for her help. Erin observed that I was still erect and suggested that we could engage privately every 2 hours to alleviate the situation. We descended to the main room in casual attire, Docker shorts and a collared shirt for me, and Erin in a dress with her hair down and high-heeled sandals. Mr. G was already there, sipping beer. He inquired about our swim with Ella, and I responded positively, praising Ella's swimming talents. Mr. G suggested I call him Plato, appreciating the famous name. He mentioned his father's fondness for reading about Plato. Ella joined us, also wearing a dress and heels. The dress seemed modest, but looked anything but on her. I sensed Erin feeling a bit insecure, understanding it was part of the game, Ella attempting to outshine Erin, who in turn would try to assert herself by winning Plato's attention. I moved closer to Erin, putting my arm around her shoulders. Plato informed us about the available beverages and snacks, expressing a preference for pretzels. As he spoke, he ate one. The four of us chatted for a while, and then Ella took me to show me around the house, which I found impressive. I asked if Plato used the gym, and Ella confirmed, mentioning his preference for weightlifting. She pointed to the bench with a barbell and described it as heavy. I demonstrated a few swings with the barbell, with Ella watching intently from above. Ella mentioned that Plato only did 3 reps before resting, and as she spoke, she began breathing heavily. I decided to lift the barbell and did 8 more reps. Plato then commented on Ella's strengths, suggesting that her role for the weekend should be to seduce me so Plato could take care of Erin. Ella acknowledged that similar tasks had occurred before, expressing her willingness to finish the job, even if it wasn't usually very pleasant. She playfully asked if I would stop if she started begging. I was genuinely serious in my response, but she perceived it as a joke, stating that she wouldn't stop but would enjoy seeing me beg. Ella then ascended the stairs, and I waited for my hardness to subside before standing up. The 3 of them huddled together in the living room and conversed. When I entered, they fell silent, and Plato suggested I have something to drink, maybe beer. I glanced at the bar, walked over, extracted a bottle of Corona, and popped it open. The others had wine, and we chatted for a bit. I then asked if they had finished discussing their plot or if I should leave, prompting an awkward silence. Ella glanced at the others, mainly Erin, who looked at Plato. Plato then stated that there were no secrets. At that moment, Simon came in and declared that dinner was served, leading us into the dining room, where dishes were arranged on the buffet table. It was a familial serving style. We sat at one end of a large table. They poured water, but I opted for my beer and refrained from water. Breaking the conversation, Plato addressed the tense situation I had created, and we engaged in friendly discussions about politics and baseball. Plato was a Yankees fan. Erin and I rooted for the Orioles and Nationals. Ella liked the Pirates, being from Jonestown. Simon served dessert, tiramisu. I skipped mine. Plato seemed to notice. Erin insisted that Plato not skip dessert, encouraging him to eat. Plato commented on keeping his waist in check and mentioned Erin having no fat in her body, claiming to have observed her while swimming and noting her preference for beer over water. In response to Erin expressing a lack of trust, Plato dismissed the idea of being medicated with something forbidden, considering it crazy. He encouraged me to eat and drink while pushing a glass of water and tiramisu toward me. I smiled and offered the same to Plato. However, he sat with a stony face and instructed Simon to clear the table. Simon noticed the change in the water and dessert arrangement, picked up my untouched glass of water and tiramisu, and carried them away. Ella suggested moving to the courtyard for music and dancing. Erin and Plato remained silent. I stood up and extended my hand to Ella, leading her to the patio. Once there, she remarked on my apparent suspicion of Plato slipping something into the food and water. I acknowledged the possibility but noted that Plato hadn't taken either himself and had them. Removed by Simon, the others joined us, and soft music started playing. I approached Erin, took her by the elbow, and led her away from Plato into the open area. We danced, and although Erin was initially shy, she eventually relaxed, pressing herself close to me. She whispered, "I love you, Donnie, always." I love you too, Aaron. We continued dancing. The music concluded and we joined Plato and Ella at a table. Soon the music resumed, and Ella rose, offering her hand to me. She led me to the dance floor. We danced. Ella might have been the world's most captivating distraction. With her sweet, subtle fragrance and the contours of her body, she entranced me, eliciting immediate delight, as she always did. Observing Plato's hands on Aaron's backside, I noted that she didn't push them away. Breaking away from Ella, I walked the short distance to Aaron and Plato, standing there and observing them. Aaron noticed and tried to move away from Plato, who persisted in keeping his hands on her. She gently pushed him on the chest, expressing a desire to avoid problems. Plato released her but took her hand, guiding her back to the table. Ella returned after me, and we sat down, with her sitting very close to me. Aaron held Plato's hand as they sat side by side. Plato expressed disappointment in me, claiming that Ella was a fantastic lover and could provide me with one of the most powerful and delightful experiences of my life. He accused me of denying her this opportunity. I asserted that I had a wife and wouldn't entertain the idea of a trade, bringing us back to the initial discussion. Turning to Aaron, I stated that it was either him or me, with no intermediary options. She withdrew her hand from his but looked at me and suggested that it was only for the weekend, and on Monday, everything would be back to normal. She asked if I couldn't have some fun with Ella for the time being. Scrutinizing her, I questioned if she was serious, and if I should take it as a yes or no, even if it meant it would be over between us. I firmly stated my refusal with a simple no. Despite not understanding why it should imply anything, I made it clear that I wouldn't entertain the idea. I extended my hand to her, and she took it. Pulling her toward me, I gave her the hottest kiss I could muster, running my hands up and down her body. Afterward, I pulled away, tears welling up in my eyes. I exhaled the words that nearly crushed me, stating, "The mere thought that you would agree to be with this guy means it's all over between us. It's done." I turned and headed for the stairs. She cried out, "No, Donnie, no!" I reached the top of the stairs, grabbed my previously packed bag, and left through the back fire escape. I made the call and ran into the darkness, sobbing while running. I still heard her screams. About 20 minutes later, I heard a plane. It landed near the southern dock, and my friend Todd Jacob swam up to me. Approaching him with Plato and Simon emerging behind me, Plato exclaimed that there was no escape and suggested I stay to calm my wife down. Charging at me, he reached the pier. Plato, uncontrollable and unfit for a fight, splashed around in the water, shouting about firing me. Boarding the plane with Todd at the controls, we flew to a small lake near Dulles. A car was waiting for me there, and I paid Todd for the service. Heading home to Alexandria, the road was dark and desolate. Our house, too, was dimly lit. Upon entering, I surveyed the surroundings, photos of us in happier times, pictures of our relatives. Shocked, I sat in a chair gazing into space, and that's how I drifted off to sleep. At 8 in the morning, a car sound outside woke me up. I peered out and saw Erin stepping out of a rental car. She carried her bag to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. I stood and observed her. She stood motionless, gazing at me. She looked awful, probably no better than me. She expressed that in her entire life, she had never messed up like that, and vowed never to do it again, not wanting to lose me. I sighed in response. I confronted Erin, asking her what she thought would happen when she decided to let Plato use her. I questioned if she thought I wouldn't notice because of Ella. She admitted to being stupid and not anticipating the consequences. I inquired if Erin and Plato had set everything up, and she looked down, confessing that Plato suggested there might be a substitution when they got there. She foresaw it in advance, thinking she would say no, but I surprised her by agreeing with the condition that I go with Ella. She mentioned how much I seemed to desire Ella, and that the whole experience was intended as a sideshow to rekindle our marriage. I smiled in response. I questioned Erin about why she thought Plato would be better than me. She explained that he excited her, being older and stronger, and suggested that he knew what to do to win her over. She clarified that she never thought he would be better than me, just different. Concerned about the future, I asked how I could be sure this wouldn't happen again, considering there are many guys like Plato in the world. And he's still around. Erin insisted that she didn't mean to cheat, and believed everything was right in front of me. She thought I would agree now since I had turned down Ella. Expressing my disappointment, I remarked that she wasn't the woman I met and married, emphasizing that the woman I knew wouldn't succumb to the advances of another guy. Erin pleaded to see what happens next, and suggested we continue enjoying great lovemaking, while acknowledging that we both missed it. She stood up and removed all her clothes, prompting me to think about turning away, but ultimately not doing so. She led me upstairs. The only constant in our relationship, always present and likely to remain, is our complete sexual compatibility. I let her go. Home, and 10 years later, I picked up our kids from the school bus, Jessica, who is 8, and Robert, who is 6. Helen, who is 3 and doesn't attend school yet, stayed with me. As a stay-at-home writer, I had help and the opportunity to write. It took over a year before I trusted Erin enough to let her stop taking the pills, and when she did, our love-making life flourished. The idea of her getting pregnant excited us greatly. I closed my contract with the previous publisher, and Sally and I moved on to something else. The first book I wrote was about adventures on an island closely mirroring reality. It sold a considerable number of copies, securing a movie deal that included my 3 previous books. Plato couldn't complain about half-truths in the book, where he was cast as Socrates and met a fitting fate. Erin now owns 2 stores that generate some income, while I earn substantially. Before fully accepting her back, Erin signed a post-nuptial agreement ensuring fidelity from both of us. With the school year underway, as I drove the 2 older kids home, a small red sports car arrived at our entrance. A remarkable pair of legs emerged, followed by the most beautiful woman in the world, Ella. The children excitedly ran up to her, shouting, "Aunt Ella!" She hugged them and fussed around, while young Helen welcomed her at the door. I poured her favorite drink, seltzer, and informed her that Erin would arrive soon. I mentioned preparing a high-calorie salad, concluding with, "But that's a completely different story. I'm Donald, aged 56, sharing my life for the first time. I'm married to Lauren, aged 45, and we have a 13-year-old daughter." This recount is from a few months ago. My wife, our daughter, and I were in Istanbul with a large group of 3 families, totaling around 16 people. As our trip concluded, we gathered at Istanbul Airport for our collective return to Chicago. With an 11-hour flight ahead, we conducted a group accounting session. Unexpectedly, our flight faced a 6-hour delay. Utilizing the time, we all headed to the lounge, finding it surprisingly empty. We were the sole occupants, engaging in lively conversations, sharing smiles, and reliving tales of Turkey and its delectable cuisine. Taking a brief smoke break, I returned after 15 minutes, walking towards my wife, spotting a slender figure near her. My heart raced, not due to nicotine, but an intense surge of emotions. The closer I got, the more my heart raced, transporting me back 2 decades to a moment of holding hands in a church, saying "I do," and embarking on a shared life. Suddenly, I snapped back to the lounge, informing my wife of my need for fresh air before walking out without acknowledging the woman talking to her. Outside, memories flooded back, bringing me to moments with Maria in Columbus, Georgia, by the Chattahoochee River. Closing my eyes, I revisited our love story, from college to marriage. Maria, my life, has been the object of my affection since our college days. We married, moved in together, and embarked on a promising married life. My journalism career and her role as a financial expert led to frequent travels, yet we maintained our connection. Maria's sparkling eyes brightened my days, and when at home, our time was filled with love and delicious meals she prepared. The initial 2 years of marriage were seamless, with no signs of trouble in paradise. We postponed having children to establish ourselves professionally. Our only challenge was the limited time we could spend together due to our demanding jobs. Travel became a constant, even for Maria. The sole point of contention was my mother, living alone and desiring frequent visits. My wife harbored a dislike for her, and although I never probed the reasons, I endeavored to keep them apart, maintaining a delicate balance between them. In January, my mother became ill, and I informed my wife that I would care for her. She wasn't pleased, since I had just returned from covering a story in Iraq. We argued because she wanted me to hire help for my mother instead of going myself. I explained that my mother was old, and this might be the last time I saw her alive. Maria was unhappy, but I ignored it. 3 days later, my mother died in my arms, leaving me devastated. After her burial, I returned home, and Maria once again complained about my mother. I was shocked and couldn't understand her point. She caused so much trouble, insisting that the deceased person should have been in the hospital from the start. I remained silent, trying to comprehend it all. "Why is Maria criticizing a deceased person?" I retorted, but she shut me down, saying the person wouldn't respond, so I should zip it. That led to a week of silence between us. To break the ice, I took her out for dinner, and that night we shared in closeness. For a moment, things seemed better, but I had to go to Afghanistan to cover the historic Silk Road. In my absence, Maria earned promotions and a higher salary. When I returned 2 weeks later, everything had changed. Coming home, Maria greeted me warmly, but during dinner, she seemed tense. She said we needed changes in our lives. "What changes do you want?" I asked. She expressed the challenges of my frequent and prolonged absences, longing for my touch. Maria gave me 2 options: find a job near her, or find her job to travel with me. Torn but relieved by her honesty, I agreed to find another job, closing the topic. The next morning, I resigned and got a local job at the TV channel even though it paid less. When I told Maria about the 30% reduction in my salary, she was angry. I explained the trade-off for a stationary job, but she resisted, upset about the decreased contribution and its impact on her lifestyle. It was a tough situation, but I was committed to making it work. We continued like that, and over the next 3 months, things deteriorated. We talked less, and nights lacked lovemaking. Her demeanor shifted from a loving wife to a nagging presence. She found faults in everything, and not a single day passed without going to bed angry. It got so bad that one night she asked me to stop breathing because my breath disturbed her sleep. A few days later, my phone went missing, prompting me to use my wife's phone to call mine. Surprisingly, her phone was locked, which was unusual since I never had a lock on mine and she never did either, as far as I knew. This raised suspicions about why her phone had a lock. Was she hiding something? On a Thursday night, she returned from a late-night party with her office friends, appearing disheveled in a black dress with no lipstick. When I asked what happened, she explained she danced too much and was tired. Helping her to the bedroom, I noticed a bruise on her left thigh, and she wasn't wearing panties, which was out of character for her. Unable to sleep that night, I became determined to uncover the truth. As a journalist, my instinct was to investigate. Although I knew many people who could assist, I preferred handling it on my own. 3 weeks later, I found myself outside Motel 6 on Victory Drive at 2:30 p.m., having tracked Maria's car there. Approaching room 12, I unlocked the door and discovered a monitor displaying my wife in a compromising position with her blonde lover Steve Bowman, an old college foe who'd always admired Maria. My tears had ceased, leaving me emotionally numb. The pain in my heart was overwhelming after 3 weeks of relentless investigation. Breaking the door and acting impulsively crossed my mind, but I had promised the motel manager no violence, a condition for his assistance in setting up recording devices in the room. Despite the manager's restriction, violence remained an option. Outside the motel, I left with a smile, got into my car, and parked behind Steve's Mustang. Armed with an ice pick, I punctured all 4 tires, patiently waiting for what would unfold next. After an hour, Steve emerged, holding Maria by her exposed waist, an image I captured on camera. I returned my camera to its place and stepped out of my truck, approaching them directly. Maria remained silent, appearing as if she had seen a ghost, while Steve wore a sinister grin, reveling in taking another man's wife. Keeping his grip on her waist, I observed Maria's feeble attempt to free herself. Upon noticing me, she greeted and questioned my unexpected presence. I stared back, not uttering a word. In an effort to explain, she insisted that she could clarify, emphasizing that it wasn't what I might be thinking. In response to her explanation, my retort came with my gaze fixed on Steve's hand on her waist, stating that I was not thinking, just observing. With a smile, I made a remark suggesting that Steve might have taken away my wife. Maria denied any wrongdoing, explaining that their interaction was part of a meeting they had at that location. My response was cynical, pointing out that the meeting seemed to involve unconventional activities. I asked if Steve had satisfied her, prompting a gasp from Maria as she recalled her recent words. A warning followed, stating that all her actions were on video and would be sent to her office, reaching friends, family, Linda, and her dad. Steve interjected, shouting a plea to leave Linda out of the situation. Dismissing his request, I added that Linda had every right to be involved since her husband was involved with my wife, creating a lot of unfinished business. Maintaining a smile, I continued, mentioning that Linda had already witnessed their actions and was eagerly awaiting the video copy to file for divorce. I suggested that in their situation, preparing to say goodbye to their beloved Mustang might be wise, as it would be sold to settle the lawsuit. Furious, Steve lunged at me, a big mistake considering my years of travel to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I had been among warriors and fighters, learning a few tricks along the way. Blocking his right hand, ducking forward, I landed a left on his chin, causing him to drop like a bag of potatoes. He struggled to get up, wobbling towards me, only to receive an uppercut that left him unconscious. Maria stood there, horrified, and I instructed her to get in the truck. We didn't go home. Instead, we headed straight to my lawyer. Ignoring Maria's inquiries, I gestured for her silence. In the lawyer's office, we were directed to the large conference room and took seats on opposite sides of the table. The atmosphere was tense until Ron Freeman, my lawyer, entered and handed an envelope to Maria. He explained the terms, stating that the divorce had been filed based on irreconcilable differences. There was no shared property, and the legal transfer of his mother's house hadn't occurred, so she couldn't claim it. He informed her that she would receive half the money from the joint account, which she could withdraw. Since she earned more, there was no alimony. Ron concluded the discussion and left the room. Maria clutched the envelope and directed her gaze at me. Breaking the silence, I warned her that if she contested the divorce, I'd alter the grounds to infidelity, ensuring widespread exposure of her actions on all social media platforms. I threatened to send the evidence to her office, leading to termination, and vowed to follow her if she fled to another city, making her life a perpetual fear of tarnished reputation. After she nodded in understanding, I stood up and left. Maria, however, spoke up, questioning if I wanted to know why she acted as she did. She explained that I desired a lifestyle she couldn't provide, seeking luxury without understanding the sacrifices. According to her, the blonde lover fulfilled those desires temporarily, but he was already married and merely seeking cheap entertainment. Maria questioned how long such happiness would last, anticipating a cycle of seeking new lovers. She concluded by pointing out my present situation, with only an envelope in hand. Her parting words wished me a nice day. Months later, I encountered her in court during the divorce proceedings. We never exchanged words, only receiving the court's orders granting the divorce. Steve, her lover, never filed a complaint against me, as cameras in the parking lot would have shown him as the aggressor. I sent Linda the videos and evidence of Steve's infidelity leading to their divorce, and rumors surfaced of Steve facing consequences from Linda's brothers. Linda's father, connected and vengeful, wanted to punish Maria, but Linda intervened. I changed jobs and eventually returned to my old position in a different city. Life moved forward. At Istanbul Airport, I found myself a chief journalist with ample wealth, a faithful wife, and a wonderful daughter. Back in the airport lounge, my wife continued conversing with Maria for hours. Staying away, I observed their interaction, concerned about Maria's intentions. Later, I confirmed our departure time with airport officials. Boarding the flight after a challenging wait, I sat beside my wife, who displayed a different smile. Curious, I inquired about her discussion with Maria. She revealed that she was expressing gratitude to Maria for her mistakes, which led her to find me. Surprised, I asked if Maria had disclosed this information. My wife clarified that Maria never mentioned me, but shared court orders and investigative materials found in the attic. When I asked about their conversation, my wife downplayed it, stating she listened to Maria's regrets about missing her ex-husband and her desire for a life like mine. I smiled, closed my eyes, and settled back into my chair.
Tracked my cheating wife to AP's house, informed his wife, and blindsided mine with divorce papers. I, 31 male, have been married to Lucy, 30 female, for over 3 years. Perfectly happy, or so I thought. I treated her to a makeover for her last birthday. And I guess that was about when things started to change, or at least when I noticed it. My wife has 3 makeup looks: a quick errand running look, an office look 15 to 20 minutes, and a date event look 30 to 45 minutes. When we were dating, all I saw was the date look, and she was quite stunning. Most of the time, she is in the office look unless we go out, then I get the date look, and the weekend is usually in errand mode. This is what tipped me off that something was amiss. She started wearing her date look to work once a week, and then sometimes when she would go out shopping on the weekend. I commented on it one night, and she said she only did it on special days when they took them out to lunch or had meetings with clients. I noticed that on days when she dressed up, she tended to be late coming home, usually with the excuse of having to work on a project. A couple of weeks ago, I took the car down to get the oil changed and stopped on the way home to run it through the car wash. I decided to give it a good vacuuming while I was there. I was cleaning the trunk when I noticed a small bag off to the side. Inside was her toiletries and makeup, plus some clothes. At first, I assumed it was her gym bag, but there was a lingerie set in there, used and dirty, and my heart sank. I didn't say anything when I got home and started doing some chores around the house, trying to make sense of it all. I finally got an AirTag off of one of our suitcases and put it deep down into a pocket on her bag in the trunk. My work wife, Susan, has become one of my wife's closest friends, and we talk about almost everything, including things you shouldn't share with your coworker of the opposite sex. I told Susan about the change in Lucy's makeup habits and her working late. I asked Susan if she thought Lucy could be stepping out on me. Susan's denial was swift and absolute, that Lucy wasn't cheating on me and she was just doing it because it gave her more self-confidence. Susan has a nervous tell when she is stressed about something, and after working with her for 8 years, I knew she was not being truthful. I did not tell her about finding the bag in Lucy's trunk. A couple of days later, Lucy got in the shower with me and started playing with me, and after we got out, she gave me a BJ. I get a BJ from my wife on my birthday, anniversary, and around Christmas, and that's it. So now my head is spinning, and I check the bag in the trunk. It has fresh clothes and a different piece of lingerie in it as well. Saturday morning, Lucy says she's going shopping and grabbing lunch at the mall. I told her to give me a second and I would go with her. She said she was shopping for clothes, and she knows how I hate that, but I said I didn't mind getting to spend extra time with her, and I might look for a new dress shirt while I'm out there and could use her opinion. She was clearly aggravated, but I was persistent, and we went shopping. The next week, I put a note in the bag: "Come home." I know. Thursday, she was acting different, and I asked if she would be home on time, and she wasn't sure but said she would call me if it looked like she might have to stay late. At 2 p.m., I saw her location had changed and was moving away from the house. I tried to call her, but it went to voicemail, and I got a text that she was in a meeting and would call me later. I sent her one back and said I was in the neighborhood and thought I would bring her a snack and a latte. The AirTag now shows her heading back to the office. I picked up her latte and a sticky bun and got to her office in time to see her run to the door. I found her in her office and dropped off the latte, saying I would see her at home later. By 3 p.m., she's heading away from her office in the same direction as before. I sent her a text saying I love you with a big heart emoji, and a couple of minutes later she sent me a me too reply. The bag stopped moving, and after about 10 minutes I tried to FaceTime her, but she didn't pick up. Shortly after, she's blowing up my phone, but I didn't answer, with texts asking me to please pick up the phone. She got home and asked me how long I had known. I told her I wondered when she started changing up her makeup routine but wasn't sure until a couple of weeks ago when I found the bag in the trunk. I told her to tell Susan she was a bad liar. I said the divorce will be friendly, and she could then have her new lover without me in the way. She asked if there was some way I could forgive her and not get a divorce. I asked her for the whole truth, how long and with whom she had been cheating. She said for a couple of months and asked me why it mattered who it was. I said I didn't want to accidentally shake the hand of a man that ruined my marriage. She finally told me it was a coworker and his name. I made her call him and hand me the phone. I introduced myself and said I know everything, best confess to your wife before she finds out from me, and I hung up. I told Lucy she needed to block him and cut all contact, and she said she has to work with him and that would be impossible. I said I can't see any way this can work if you don't. I said I was done talking, and she needed to think about how she was going to fix this. I was level-headed enough that I got her confession recorded on my phone in case she tries to change her story later. The next morning, I left early and was waiting for my boss outside his office. I told him I couldn't work with Susan anymore for personal reasons. After talking to our boss, Susan confronted me in the hall demanding an explanation. I said she lied to me about knowing what Lucy was up to and told her I was on to her. I said I can't work with somebody like that anymore. She apologized and said she told Lucy to end her affair before I found out for sure. I said I wish that made it better, but that would just be another lie. So, in short order, I have lost my best friend and possibly my marriage. I found her coworker's wife's contact info, and I'm sending her a copy of Lucy's confession tomorrow just in case. I have an appointment with a lawyer to discuss my options tomorrow. My wife is still adamant that we can get past this, but has yet to talk about why this happened in the first place. I feel shell-shocked, and while I don't want to get divorced, I can't imagine a way forward. Busy morning? I had a good chat with the lawyer this morning. He gave me some advice and gave me a worksheet to fill out and a list of do's and don'ts. We have a longer meeting scheduled for Friday, but he will start the paperwork today. He told me that informing the other wife may come back to bite me. He was right. At work, my boss hit me with a short list for Susan's replacement that I have to interview and make a decision on as soon as possible. I received a long email from Susan apologizing for everything and wanting to meet me for lunch to talk. My boss hasn't said anything, but the rumor mill is going crazy about Susan getting kicked off my team, and the amount of butt-kissing around me is ridiculous. Lucy got called into HR before lunch and has been put on a performance improvement plan. It seems her affair partner turned in his resignation this morning, and during his exit interview, he threw Lucy under the bus. He admitted that they had been having an affair on company time. She is now terrified that she's going to get fired. If she gets fired, it will change the terms of the divorce, so my lawyer was right about this coming back to bite me. As far as the accolades for handling the situation so calmly, I should mention that I've lost 7 pounds in the last week, and nothing I eat stays in me for very long. I don't sleep more than 3 hours at a time, and I'm worried whenever I have to drive. I've called my doctor and he prescribed something to help me sleep, but he also wants to see me tomorrow to run some tests, including an STD screen. Lucy and I are sleeping in separate rooms, and I haven't mentioned divorce yet, though we have a couples therapist we're seeing on Monday afternoon. Well, talk about a makeover leading to a breakover. It's like she took the phrase "New Year, New Me" a tad too literally. Who knew makeup could be the ultimate relationship barometer? If only there was a makeup tutorial on how to conceal infidelity. Maybe she thought a smoky eye could hide the seedy affairs. Susan should have majored in deception instead of whatever she does at work, but hey. At least now you know who not to trust with your secrets, especially if they involve lipstick and lies. As for Lucy, she's playing a risky game of office romance roulette. Mixing business with pleasure is a surefire way to get a pink slip and a divorce decree all in one go. And her coworker really took the saying, leave work at work, to a whole new level, straight to HR. But hey, at least you're shedding pounds faster than a shedding cat. Though I'm guessing it's not exactly the weight loss plan you had in mind. Who knew marital stress could be the ultimate diet? There's a lot to unpack, so I'll try to be brief. Sunday dinner with Lucy's parents, they are very conservative. Toward the end of the dinner, she said we were going to counseling because she got caught cheating with a coworker. Her dad grilled her at the dinner table and later yelled at her behind closed doors. Lucy cried most of the way home, saying that her dad now hated her. Since then, all communication from her mom has been through Lucy's sister. Therapy for me was like taking a test you had all the answers to and already knew your grade. Lucy finally gave a timeline of the affair, then I got to ask some questions. Did she do anal? How many times did she blow him, since it was always rationed for me? How many times did they meet? Did she use condoms? How many times did I get sloppy seconds? Was he bigger than me? Who knew? Did they trash talk me when they were screwing? Did you lick his butt? There were others, but you get the idea. I didn't believe her answers because I couldn't believe anything she says now. I got a chance to tell Lucy how I felt, and we talked about a few things she needed to do, like confess to both our parents about what she did. Our therapist talked about what we needed to do going forward and gave us advice about what we needed to think about before our next session, but that was about the extent of what we talked about before we ran out of time. I will say one positive thing. She never blamed me for the affair or said I wasn't fulfilling her needs, forcing her to seek them elsewhere. The FaceTime with my parents went great compared to hers. They were both pretty stoic when she told them. My dad did say he was very disappointed in her decision-making. That's as close as my dad gets to calling someone the W word. I told a few of our friends the details. I made sure that a couple of them were the type to do the work for me. Lucy has been beside herself answering questions coming in from all her friends. She has made me some ludicrous offers, an open-ended hall pass, opening the marriage, and other sexual favors. I told her 2 wrongs don't make a right, and I wasn't the one that wanted an open marriage. Tomorrow is Thursday D-Day. And she gets served her divorce papers around 9 a.m. What I wouldn't give to have a video of her getting served and seeing the look on her face. Why isn't that a service the process servers offer? I was waiting until after tomorrow to update this post in a new post. Should I do a new update post or simply add it to this one? Let's see how the community is reacting to the story thus far. First up, I wouldn't let her back in bed with you until she gets tested, and you need to get tested as well. Unless you two have children together, I would insist she move out for the time being. Plan on starting divorce proceedings, and you can always change your mind later. But it shows her that you are serious about her wrongdoing. I think you should cut your losses and move on. The next person says, it amazes me how someone who supposedly loves their partner can treat them this way. The amount of effort required to lie, manipulate, and deceive their partner should never be underestimated. Best of luck if you try reconciliation. Given your circumstances, I would never entertain the idea. Get out and find someone who loves and respects you. For your information, Susan was never your friend. She just used you as well. The uppy updates in the comments. I know that the affair partner's wife got my message. Lucy's phone is blowing up. It would seem the affair partner's wife heard the recording and has packed up her 3 kids and moved to a hotel, and after she talks to a lawyer. She is moving in with her parents 200+ miles away. She left a voicemail that would make a pirate blush. Well, talk about a family dinner that left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. If only they served shots of truth serum instead of gravy. And therapy sessions turning into Q&A sessions, yikes. There are just some things I don't need to know. As for those ludicrous offers, it's like she's trying to bargain her way out of a cheating scandal. That's like a Black Friday deal, open marriage, more like open Pandora's box. And the affair partner's wife's reaction? Sounds like she's ready to raise some hell. Or at least relocate to a hotel room with enough privacy for a good old-fashioned angry voicemail session. Ahoy, matey! Update recap, I caught my wife Lucy having an affair with a married coworker. I put a note in her bag saying, come home. I know. She got home and confessed to seeing him for over 2 months and begged for forgiveness. She said she would do anything to stay together. I made her call him and hand me the phone. I introduced myself and said, I know everything. Best confess to your wife before she finds out from me, and I hung up. I had recorded my wife's confession and sent a copy to his wife. I told Lucy she had to confess to both our parents about what she did. My parents were upset, but her parents practically disowned her. The next day, her affair partner went to work early and turned in his notice. Before leaving, he threw my wife under the bus and confessed that most of their trysts happened in the afternoons on company time. I met with a lawyer and got divorce proceedings underway. We did go to therapy where I got to ask a lot of uncomfortable questions and let her know how badly she hurt me. Afterward, she made me some ludicrous offers, an open-ended hall pass, opening the marriage, and other sexual favors. I told her 2 wrongs don't make a right, and I wasn't the one who wanted an open marriage. Last Thursday, she got served, and I dodged her phone calls all day. I had a neighbor couple with me at the house when she got there, and they witnessed her tantrum. She threw several items at me while yelling and screaming. The police were called, and they arrived in time to see her launch a glass at me. After getting the story from all 4 of us, they asked if I wanted to press charges, which I declined. They told her she needed to find someplace other than here to spend the night and walked her in while she packed a bag. Her sister showed up and got her to go home to her apartment. Upon hearing about the events at my house, My lawyer wasted no time in getting a restraining order against my wife. When she got the restraining order, she had a panic attack and/or a nervous breakdown and had to be taken to the ER, where they kept her until Tuesday morning. Sunday, her sister came by the house and packed up the rest of her things, taking them back to her place. I asked how Lucy was doing, but got nothing from her sister except some attitude. Tuesday morning, her lawyer finally reached out to mine, and they have meetings scheduled to talk about a settlement. At my lawyer's request, I have an appointment with a therapist who he recommended for later in the week. A sincere shout out to several of you who have let me vent and offered encouragement privately. The audience has some thoughts. First up, I love cheating spouses who suddenly discover that they desperately love their significant others after all and want to save the marriage. If only they had cared as much before they cheated. I'm sure this isn't easy for you, but you're handling it in the best way possible. Go no contact as soon as you can. Hope the divorce goes well and you can move on quickly. All the best. Someone else chimes in. I read this exact story months ago on Literotica. It's a business-to-business story. I don't remember the title, but I'll let you know if I do. The tantrum and the police visit, really? It's like she's auditioning for a role in Real Housewives Divorce Edition. I hope she brought her a game because throwing glassware is so last season. And the restraining order? Talk about adding insult to injury. It's like getting served divorce papers with a side of "stay the heck away from me." Sorry, Lucy, there's no Oscar for best performance in a failed marriage, though I have to give her credit for creativity. Who knew a mental breakdown could be the ultimate diversion tactic? It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Noble effort, but ultimately ineffective. Maybe next time she'll try a different approach, like actually facing the consequences of her actions instead of putting on a theatrical show. But hey, at least you're handling it like a pro. How did you catch your partner cheating? Share your stories with us in the comments below.
Forever lasted for 3 years, 5 months, and 20 days. My peaceful and predictable life started falling apart 2 weeks ago. I'm Mark, and Carly has been my wife for 3.5 years. We met at a career event during my master's degree, where she praised the company she worked for. Although my degree and her job didn't align, we clicked. After a few ordinary dates, things took off. She was 6 months out of an engagement, and I had been casually dating for the past 2 years. We spent most of our free time together. While she had a salaried position, I was knee-deep in my thesis. We were both cautious about closeness, but once it started, we knew we belonged together. We got married after my graduation, vowing our love would last forever. I found a job close enough for Carly to keep hers, working in network solutions in northern Indiana as a project manager. I oversee a team of 12 and occasionally travel for client setups with a group of colleagues. I don't decide who travels. A group of project managers and my boss, Dennis, make those decisions. We aim to give everyone on-site experience. This time, I had 2 men and 3 women on my team, all older than me. Dealing with a challenging client, their experience was an asset. The first angry encounter didn't take long. We arrived at 8 a.m., had an introductory meeting, and began implementing our solution. Mid-morning, their supposed expert lost his temper with Leanne, one of my qualified team members. I helped diffuse the situation with their site manager. Leanne was shaken, so I gave her time to recover in the coffee room. Unfortunately, the scene repeated itself. After lunch, their expert was sent home, and despite efforts to calm Leanne, I eventually sent her back to the hotel. She joined the team for dinner, and I invited them to join me for a run around the park. Leanne was the only one who accepted. While jogging, she suggested running away together, but I reminded her of company policies regarding relationships between managers and subordinates. Back in my room, I was perplexed by the conversation. I talked with Carly, but didn't mention Leanne's actions. Leanne, always displeased with me being her superior, showed signs of disrespect. The next morning, I asked Leanne if everything was okay. "Currently, I'm fine, Mark," she replied. Thankfully, the day was uneventful. Their expert doubted our work, but didn't lose his temper. My team and I had dinner, and during the evening, a disruptive guest caused a scene. After dinner, I jogged alone, talked with Carly, and watched the 10 p.m. news. A knock on my door revealed Leanne with her coat on. I greeted Leanne and inquired about her well-being, noticing a change in her tone. She mentioned wanting to show me something and proceeded to reveal her body. I advised Leanne to cover up and declined her offer, suggesting she return to her room, with plans to see her in the morning. She responded with a mock-sad look and a smile before leaving. Recognizing the importance of informing Dennis, I sent an email seeking a private conversation about Leanne. The next morning, I approached Leanne and asked if everything was okay. She assured me that she was currently fine. While she demonstrated skill in her job, her behavior struck me as strangely odd. Dennis responded to my email later, expressing his intention to meet with me. Upon my return, everything seemed normal for the rest of the trip. Back home, Leanne was as abrupt as usual. I hope whatever caused those 2 strange nights is in the past. Foolishly, I received a text from Leanne on Sunday evening, describing explicit content. Emoticons. I hadn't seen Leanne since our plane landed on Friday evening. She likely sent the text meant for her lover to me by mistake. I didn't respond and planned to talk with her in the morning. The idea of Leanne with a lover was hard to imagine. Just saying. However, the same could easily be said about me. I mentioned to Leanne that I thought she had mistakenly sent me a text the previous night. She replied, "Mark, I didn't send anyone a text message last night." I chose not to press the issue. She was deeply involved in debugging a problem, and I had a busy day myself. On Tuesday night, Leanne sent a message, which included a selfie. She expressed, "Could the closeness with you get any better? I don't think so." With more lovebird emoticons, I emailed Dennis again, reminding him of my request for a private conversation. He apologized for the delay, but postponed it until next Monday. Leanne called in sick on Wednesday, as Dennis was out of town. I had to wait a day to confront her. My day was quite ordinary. Unexpectedly, someone called my name as I was getting into my car. Whatever hit me knocked me out, and I woke up in the hospital. The police updated me on Terry, Leanne's husband, who thought I was having an affair with her. He had violently attacked me, causing a concussion, 2 broken ribs, a hernia, and a broken hand. Terry left copies of Leanne's texts and pictures, colored to hide explicit content, next to my unconscious body. Unfortunately, he gave the same copies to Carly. Carly answered the first call, expressing her wish for my painful demise. I stayed in the hospital overnight for observation, and Carly refused to answer her phone. On Thursday, I took a cab home, and Carly wouldn't talk to me. Rather than starving, I ordered pizza on Friday. Despite the pain, I went to the office. In the afternoon, I learned I was on paid leave due to Terry's complaint. My hearing would be on Monday when Dennis returned. When I got home, Carly was dressed provocatively. I questioned Carly about her attire, expressing surprise at her early return and noting the note she left. She replied that she had a date and I warned her not to proceed, emphasizing the irreversible consequences. She responded, suggesting that I was being hypocritical, claiming innocence in the accusations her jealous husband made. According to her, he mistook her for someone else, and she hadn't done anything to jeopardize our marriage. She challenged me to produce proof, denying any response to the alleged texts and pictures. She asserted her complete innocence, expressing disbelief. She mentioned that she might or might not be back that night, advising me not to wait up for her. I reiterated my warning, but she dismissed it, setting in motion the end of our marriage. She revealed her intention to go on a date with someone from work as revenge for what she believed I had done. Her note echoed these sentiments, portraying me as worthless, and indicated her intention to have some fun. After our argument, I tried to get comfortable, but couldn't. I left a note for Carly, explaining that something was really wrong, and I headed to the UR. It was 6 p.m. on Friday. Tests at the hospital revealed a ruptured spleen, and my brother was listed as my emergency contact. They operated, stitched the spleen, and then stitched me back together. I woke up to the beeping and humming sounds, drifting in and out of awareness until finding myself in a sun-filled room. Following their recommended diet, I sat, contemplating my situation. My confusion was interrupted by my cell phone buzzing. Although the number was unfamiliar, I answered it. The caller accused me of being foolish, stating that I had been with her again last night. I defended myself, saying that Terry had the wrong person, as I had been in the hospital since 6 p.m. the previous night. Silence followed. I reiterated that I went to the gym at 8 p.m. and was only gone for an hour. Terry mentioned a text from her that morning, talking about the great closeness we had. I clarified that I was on the operating table and still at University Hospital in room 612. I assured Terry that I was not going anywhere that day and needed to get to the bottom of this. I promised to see her in a bit. I checked my messages, and found a text from Leanne claiming that the closeness last night was so good, the floor nurse dropped by to check her vitals and change her drip. Overwhelmed, I felt like asking her for something to end this nightmare. She left, saying she'd be back to change my dressings. As soon as the nurse left, Carly entered my room, still dressed provocatively, and asked if I was okay. I assured Leanne that I was fine and asked her to leave, expressing my desire for her not to be around. She pleaded, explaining that she was worried about me and had come right away when she read my note. In response, I stated that her staying out all night meant she ended our marriage, and I insisted she leave. My voice rose, prompting the floor nurse to inquire if everything was okay. I requested her assistance to escort Carly out, and security had to step in. I attempted to make sense of Leanne's actions, considering the possibility of revenge. I wondered if it was due to my rejection of her or being her boss. It had to be one of those reasons. I speculated that she might have mistaken my phone number for someone else's, as nothing else made sense. Carly called my cell, expressing that our marriage was over, and she wanted me to leave her alone. I responded, disagreeing with her, claiming she messed around and now acted self-righteous. She argued that I was wrong, asserting her innocence and stating that we were done. I hung up, and she sent a text message saying, "We need to talk." I refused, stating, "No, we don't. Move your stuff out or set my stuff by the door." She questioned our connection, saying, "I thought we were soulmates. Is that what you thought when you were having your revenge?" I retorted, "Is that what you thought when you were with your lover? I didn't need this." Frustrated, I turned off my cell phone and requested morphine. Just before lunch, the nurse returned to change my dressings, starting with my face. Terry and Leanne knocked and asked if they could come in. Leanne reacted, exclaiming, "Oh my God! Mark, what happened to you? Hi, Leanne. This must be your husband Terry, isn't it? What happened to your lip?" She diverted her eyes. I explained, "I ran into a door. It happened in the employee parking lot. I don't know the status of the investigation at this point. Last night they discovered I had a ruptured spleen. Nothing serious, just a few stitches fixed the problem." I knew Terry was the one who caused my injuries, and so did the police. Evidently, Terry hadn't informed Leanne about his encounter with the police. The nurse finished with my face and asked if I wanted my company to leave while she did the spleen surgery dressings. I replied, "No, let them stay." The nurse needed something, so she left, saying she would return shortly. Leanne took a seat on the chair, and Terry attempted to start a conversation. I gestured for Terry to come closer, and I quietly mentioned my concerns about Leanne's peculiar behavior on the last road trip, asking if she had been under pressure recently. Terry shared in a hushed tone that her mother had died in a car crash last Christmas, and her sister had just started chemo for breast cancer. He added that she seemed to be dealing with it okay. The nurse returned, prompting Terry to back up against the wall, and the room fell silent. Carly stormed in, yelling at me and Leanne. The nurse called security, and Terry restrained Carly until security arrived. After the peace was restored, the nurse continued her work, and Leanne got up, standing close enough to hold my hand. Leanne expressed, "Last night was awesome. We need to go to that beach again. The closeness with you is so good." Terry, myself, and the attending nurse stared in disbelief. The nurse looked at Terry and mentioned, "Don't let her leave, I'll be right back." Terry wrapped Leanne in a hug, silently conveying, "I'm so sorry." After about 5 minutes, the nurse and a pair of doctors escorted Terry and Leanne from the room. I had all afternoon to replay the entire 2 weeks, realizing there were two very different Leanne personalities. Several hours later, Terry returned, expressing his apologies. He inquired about Leanne's odd behavior, and when I mentioned the angry encounter, he lit up. "I'll be right back." He returned with a doctor, and I repeated my story. Terry began explaining, "Mark, when Leanne was a child, she was mentally traumatized quite severely. Her father was relentless in his verbal mistreatment of her. She has been in the midst of a nervous breakdown since last week's encounter. You said she did something strange the day after her work encounter. Was there any conflict involving her that day?" I said no, but then remembered the guest and the tray. The doctor joined in. "That would do it. She has what we call dissociative identity disorder. Basically, she has dual personalities. It is usually a reaction to trauma as a way to help a person avoid bad memories. You must have been the person who interceded on her behalf. You made an imprint on her fantasy personality. Terry asked about Sunday and Tuesday, and I explained about the lawnmower incident and the angry encounter. He inquired about the knockdown fight on the previous night, and I shared that she was upset about the complaint I had filed against him. Terry expressed his regret, understanding the impact on my life. The doctor explained, "Very little can be done. She needs extensive counseling to help her understand what's happened to her people. Get over it. It just takes time." Terry apologized again and left. Even though she had turned my life upside down, I really did feel sorry for Leanne. They informed me that I would likely be released by noon on Sunday if I had an uneventful evening. I sent an email to Dennis asking him to please contact Terry, as there had been some pertinent developments. I scrolled through the text messages from Carly, a whole lot of anger being vented towards me. It saddened me to think that this strange set of circumstances had ended my marriage. I played the voicemails, but her attempts to justify her actions only fueled my anger. They all hit the trash can. On Sunday, I drove back to find my house as I had left it. Carly had not moved out, and my stuff was still there. I started packing what I thought I'd need for the next week. Dennis called around 3 p.m. and asked if he could drop by. He said everyone was convinced I was not at fault and had done nothing wrong. My attempt to talk to him about Leanne, along with Terry explaining her medical issue, had satisfied all of higher management's concerns. I was reinstated, and this would be expunged from my employment history. Leanne had been placed on unpaid leave. I had just placed the last sack in my car when Carly pulled into the driveway. She accused me of planning to run away, calling me a coward. I explained that Leanne had a nervous breakdown and her allegations were untrue. Leanne was under observation at the university, and I suggested talking to Terry for confirmation. Despite my decision to cut my losses and move on, Carly pleaded for me to stay, claiming it was a misunderstanding. Carly insisted that Leanne made up the accusations and apologized, asking me not to leave. I firmly stated that I couldn't spend the next 40 years worried, emphasizing that I wouldn't stay married to a woman who used her personal life as a weapon of revenge. Despite Carly's pleas and apologies, I shook my head, closed my car door, and expressed my determination not to see or hear from her again. Carly continued to beg me not to go, suggesting we could overcome the misunderstanding. I expressed disbelief at her characterization of the situation as a misunderstanding, noting the changed tone in her messages and voicemails. Despite my hopes for an amicable divorce, the judge ordered counseling sessions, influenced by Carly's statement that she didn't want a divorce. Reluctantly, I attended the sessions to avoid any damage to my reputation. The first counseling session took a negative turn as the counselor attempted a divide-and-conquer approach. Carly presented her case, and then we swapped chairs. The counselor asked me to share my feelings, and I reiterated that I wouldn't stay married to a woman who used her personal life as a weapon of revenge. Carly's attempts to understand my feelings and salvage the marriage were met with my resolute stance. I repeated that I wouldn't stay married to a woman who used her personal life as a weapon of revenge. Carly's plea for more communication and cooperation fell on deaf ears, and I left the session, brushing away her attempt to stop me. As the counseling sessions continued, I maintained my refusal to cooperate. Carly persisted in discussing our feelings, but I hummed a song to drown out her attempts. Despite the counselor's efforts, the sessions deepened the divide between us. After complying with the court-ordered sessions, my attorney informed me that we needed to appear before the judge. The judge granted the petition for divorce, acknowledging the irreparable nature of the relationship. Carly's persistent pursuit of me continued after the legal resolution, with her waiting for me after work and running into me at the grocery store. I chose not to explain her actions, and her text messages inviting me out on dates were met with my resistance. Eventually, I found a way to slow down her advances. I responded to Carly's offer to go out on a date by informing her that my new wife would prefer her not to communicate with me anymore. I wished her a great life, and surprisingly, that seemed to work for a week. When she insisted that I wasn't married, I clarified that I hadn't said I was, but when I do find a new wife, that's what she will say. I requested her to move on, claiming that I already had, although her persistence made me anticipate complications in my attempts to find another woman. Now, as I try to navigate the dating scene, it becomes evident that I'm not particularly skilled at it. Despite my efforts, nobody I've encountered so far lives up to the image I had of Carly. However, I'm not in a rush. An acquaintance from accounting, a divorcee, showed interest, and I sought Dennis's approval before asking her out. After a few dates, she expressed a desire for a friends with benefits relationship. The morning after I spent the night with her for the first time, Carly sent a text. Carly questioned whether I loved this new woman, deeming it none of her business. In response, I curtly stated that my feelings were not her concern and conveyed that I still loved her. I added a brief apology, closing the conversation. Too little, too late. In the back of my mind, I can see you all watching my demise play out on Dateline. Leanne returned to work and was placed under the supervision of another manager. I do my best to avoid her. She has never said or done anything OD again. The police didn't want her need me to cooperate to convict Harry. The security cameras provided everything they needed. I did appear at his sentencing to ask the court for lenience. He was given a suspended sentence, but he still has a felony conviction. I've been married to Kathy for more than 30 years. We met when we were young, and now I'm 59 and she's 55. We have 3 adult children. Our life together has had its good and bad times, but we've always been there for each other. Kathy means the world to me. Kathy has some friends who believe in things like feminism, identity politics, and social justice. It's a bit different from what I think, but that's okay. People have their own ideas about these topics. Kathy and we sometimes talk about these things and try to understand each other's viewpoints. I did not pay attention to these ideas that Kathy had or was starting to develop. For me, they were all nonsense. Kathy had some strong views about how women were oppressed for a long time, which sometimes scared me. She personally hadn't experienced depression or discrimination. I found these discussions unsettling, so I often tried to change the subject when they came up. I have seen these woke women on TV shouting and talking all nonsense and screaming on people when they did not have any logical answer. I worried that Kathy was getting influenced by them. One day she started questioning our marriage, saying it had become dull. I suggested therapy to work on our relationship, but she wanted to go on a solo vacation instead. I reluctantly agreed, but later found out she went with her friends, who I thought were toxic. When Kathy returned from her vacation a week later, she looked like a completely different person. She had cut her hair short, and there was an unusual aura about her. It felt like she was someone I had never met before. She didn't hug me or show any affection when she arrived, which was unsettling and made me feel like a stranger to her. Kathy continued to spend more time with her friends and engage in protests, some of which I didn't support. I had a serious conversation with her, expressing my concerns about the direction she was heading. I told her that she needed to reconsider her choices. However, she didn't listen and continued with her activities. Things escalated when she was detained for participating in a protest that disrupted traffic. I had to pick Kathy up from the police station, and during the ride home, we had a very heated conversation. She remained silent throughout, which left me even more concerned about what was happening with her. Kathy began using social media, specifically TikTok, to share her feminist ideas. She started gaining a decent following, and it became clear that she was investing a significant amount of time and effort into her videos. She would spend hours getting dressed and creating her content for the platform. Her social media activities seemed to be consuming a lot of her time and energy. One day, I came across a video from Kathy that left me horrified due to its message. In the video, she discussed the desire to avoid becoming a miserable older woman. While emphasizing the common trajectory of raising a family and working hard, she pointed out that many women realize in their 50s or 60s that they have nothing for themselves, leading to resentment. Kathy suggested the need to create individual lives, something exclusive for personal fulfillment. Even in good marriages, she noted that unhappiness could persist. Divorce might not be necessary, but finding what brings fulfillment and a sense of truly living one's life was crucial. Kathy encouraged living each day to the fullest, enjoying good marriages, and maintaining individuality apart from spouses and children. She urged women to break free from routine, explore the world, and discover fulfillment and happiness beyond their roles as mothers. I felt that she was encouraging women to get divorced. I went home that evening and confronted her, and to my shock, she said that she was leaving and had already packed her bags. I tried to stop her, but she shot back and said that she is bored with her life and she wants freedom and happiness. She does not want the responsibilities of her being the grandma or being my wife. She wants to enjoy her life and wants to explore more outside this prison. I was speechless and felt that I had lost my wife to toxic people who have poisoned her mind. I did not stop her and just said that I'll miss her and asked to come back as soon as her exploring is over. She had moved into a smaller apartment in the center of the city. I had informed my kids about their mother, and they all said that she is just going through a phase and will get back home soon. I agreed as well and just waited for her. My wait was cut short soon and turned to shock as I received the divorce papers. She had all this planned and was not in any phase. I called Kathy, but she did not answer. My kids during this time did try to talk my wife out of divorce, but she shut them down as well. A few weeks later, we had our divorce settled, and after 30 years of marriage, I was single. The following day, Kathy shared a new video expressing that she had accomplished the move. In her new place, which she described as feeling like a princess bed, she mentioned the rain during the previous day's move. Today, she woke up with a different feeling, free, as if a weight had been lifted, and she felt genuinely excited for the first time in years. Although her place was still somewhat disorganized due to unpacking, and the apartment was relatively small, requiring intense organization, she conveyed gratitude for this change. After a couple of weeks of continuous moving, she had finally settled into her new apartment. Kathy mentioned that she would provide a tour of it tomorrow. At that moment, she just wanted to say hello. Additionally, she mentioned that her very handsome boyfriend was making dinner for her, emphasizing that life is good. I was angry and heartbroken. She broke my home and now has broken my heart. My kids also saw the video and called me to console me and asked me to move on with my life. Eventually, I did move on and found an amazing woman, Maya, who was in her early 40s. She was a high school teacher and was single. We hit it off instantly and now have been going steady. I never informed my ex-wife, and I did not think it is important. I planned a trip with my kids and Maya so that everyone can know each other and get along. Maya asked me to invite my ex-wife Kathy, as she felt it was important that she knows that there is someone in my life. So I called Kathy and invited her. Initially, she did not agree to join our trip. I did not tell her about Maya by then. My daughter later called her and asked her to join and informed that the invitation would not be extended again. I had hired an amazing boat ride for all of us, and Kathy was the last to join us. She came alone. I introduced her to Maya and told her how happy I am with Maya. I wish I could click a picture of Kathy at that very moment. Her face was red, and it seemed that she was not expecting me to get a life for me. Throughout the trip, I enjoyed Kathy's disgust towards Maya and me, although Maya had a noble intention, but I was really enjoying the results. A few days later, we came across another video of Kathy, where she revealed that the recent days had been highly traumatic for her. Despite acknowledging that it wasn't entirely her fault, she took some blame for the distressing situation. Kathy shared that she anticipated a strong physical and emotional reaction upon discovering that her estranged husband was in a new relationship. Despite being separated for a year, they still spent some family time together, and he had assured her multiple times that he wasn't involved with someone else. However, this turned out to be untrue. Kathy expressed uncertainty about joining a trip, fearing her ex-husband might misinterpret her intentions. Despite these concerns, her daughter convinced her to participate, suggesting that he might not extend another invitation. In hindsight, Kathy understood the reason for her daughter's advice. She clarified that what hurt her the most wasn't the fact that he was in a new relationship, as she had a boyfriend herself, but the fact that he hadn't informed her. She had felt secure, believing he still harbored love for her. He even invited me on a trip with him and our daughters, which I accepted. However, during the trip, I discovered some hurtful texts, and it was horrifying. The trauma that followed was intense. I had a physical and emotional breakdown, and I felt like I had completely lost control of my emotions. It was a terrible experience, and I'm struggling to cope with it. Her upset wasn't about losing me. It was more about losing the exclusive access to my resources and the stability he provided. The specific trigger was when she discovered I was telling another woman that I loved her. Not just that we were involved romantically, unlike Kathy's boyfriend, who was only interested in casual relationships, typically don't invest financially and emotionally in her. But when a man like me is in love, he often wants to build a life with the woman he loves. For Kathy, the real trauma was losing her place in my life to another woman. I began receiving numerous calls from Kathy, where she expressed her remorse and reminded me that I had asked her to come back. In response, I told her that it was too late and she would no longer be a part of my life. That boat has sailed. She had made her choice, created her own circumstances, and now she needed to live with the consequences of her decisions. A few days later, we came across another video from Kathy, where she shared that things weren't going well for her. She reflected on how life used to be good and questioned whether the difficulties were her fault, considering herself possibly selfish or self-centered. Kathy expressed her struggle with the artificiality and pretense around her, admitting she was fine initially, but now the reality of the separation was sinking in. Acknowledging that it was just a separation and there were worse things in the world, Kathy remained uncertain about what her future held. She could only remember the positive aspects and found it challenging to recall anything negative. Kathy reminisced about a lovely woman who was once a close friend, revealing that she had been invited to dinner by this person and had bought gifts for their children. Despite being at home with her own family, Kathy decided to join this other family for dinner, expressing a sense of missing her own family and the struggle of being without them. Kathy confessed that being a family meant a lot to her, and she pondered whether enduring misery would be worthwhile if it meant having her family back. Without them, she felt lost about her identity. Tearfully, Kathy clarified that her emotions weren't due to drinking, but stemmed from the profound difficulties she was facing. She wished everyone a happy Saturday and expressed hope that she would be okay later, acknowledging the profound sense of loss she felt. Kathy concluded by mentioning her plan to go sit with another family who had invited her, appreciating the gesture but acknowledging that it wasn't an easy situation for her. My daughter called me up and asked to do something, but I told them their mother chose this life and I did try to stop her. She wanted freedom. She has freedom. She has a new love life and she can explore the world as she wants. My daughter agreed and said that she agrees with every word I said, but she cannot help but feel for her mother's bad choices. A few days later, there was another video. Good morning. Sometimes I wonder what I'm doing and why I made the choices I did. Last night I had a dream about my estranged husband. He came to me saying he'd hurt his hand badly and was crying. In the dream, he needed my help, and I suggested moving in to take care of him. It felt like we were starting over the way things used to be. It was an upsetting dream, and it's not even possible. It's just how dreams are, I guess. My body is telling me that I still love him, and I always will. But things are different now. Sometimes I get angry and think, why doesn't he believe that I should have a fair share? He wants to give me some money, but it's not enough. All the things we had were partly because of me. My parents lent us money, and I played a significant role in helping him, encouraging him, and being there for him, even when things went wrong. I made mistakes and I paid for them, especially when I left. It seems like everything he did was okay, but everything I did was my fault. I'm constantly blamed for everything. So now I'm at this point in my life. He has more money than I do, and I'm struggling to find a decent place to live. Some people, especially men, think that women don't deserve anything, that they're freeloaders, and that they should just fend for themselves. After 30 years of taking care of someone, I feel undervalued, like I have no worth. It's hard. I saw the video and felt that she has now lost her mind. She did receive her share of fortune as part of the divorce settlement. I did everything by the book, and as per the law, she cannot gaslight me and make me look like a villain in this story and cannot blame me for her bad choices. I wanted to retaliate and wanted to sue her for her video. Maya then stopped me and asked me to ignore her. My kids called Kathy and told her to apologize for what she posted or she will be cut off from everyone's life. Kathy, having no choice, did post a lame apology citing her mental health as a reason. I got married to Maya a few days later, and I did unfollow Kathy on all my social media.
I'd been traveling for work for a while, and while I enjoyed the challenge, I always looked forward to coming home. My wife Nikki was constantly on my mind, and as my trips dragged on, I couldn't wait to be with her. We had our little routines, watching a movie or going out to eat, simple things that made life feel normal again. This particular trip had been tough, but I finished early. The project in Dallas went well, and I could surprise Nikki by coming home sooner than expected. The thought of her smile made all the long days worth it. As I headed upstairs with my things, my mind was already on spending the evening with Nikki. Then, I turned around and saw a man at the top of the stairs, holding a tool. Before I could react, I saw a flash and was thrown backward down the stairs. Then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I found myself in an unfamiliar bed. It was dark and I heard someone whispering nearby. I tried to move but could barely shift my head. As I struggled to focus, I recognized Nikki's voice. She was talking to a man whose back was to me. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. "He said Eric's doing better but isn't out of danger yet," Nikki replied. I realized they were talking about me. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but Nikki seemed to be pushing him toward the door. "John, you shouldn't be here," she said. "Does he remember anything?" "I don't know," she replied. He was too pilled up to talk to the detective. Nikki urged him to leave, and when I opened my eyes again, she was sitting by the window. The man was gone, and I wasn't sure if I had imagined him. I wanted to ask Nikki where I was and who the man was, but I felt too tired. The next time I woke up, it was morning, and I could see Nikki by the window. She had been crying. I turned my head and saw a man I vaguely remembered, though I didn't know who he was. He was short, with curly brown hair, wearing a worn-out suit. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep to avoid his questions. Later, the room was empty, and it was dark outside. I tried to make sense of everything. I knew I was in a hospital, but I didn't know why or for how long. Slowly, my memory returned. I remembered coming home from Dallas, setting down my bags, and heading upstairs. Then I saw a man at the top with a tool. A flash, a bang, and I was falling. After that, I only had fragmented memories. Waking up in the hospital, Nikki crying, and maybe that man asking me questions. But I wasn't sure what was real or what was a dream. The next time I saw Nikki, she looked exhausted, pale, with bloodshot, puffy eyes. She came over, took my hand, and kissed my forehead. "Nikki, are you okay?" "You don't look well," I said, surprised at how weak my voice sounded. Here's a revised version with clearer attribution of dialogue. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted softly. "I was so scared of losing you. But the doctor says you're out of danger now and should make a full recovery." I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. "How long have I been here?" "Since Friday," she replied. "What's today?" I asked. "Tuesday," she said. I stared at the ceiling. "I've lost 3 days," I muttered. She leaned in, her voice filled with concern. "How are you feeling now?" "I'm not sure," I said. "My head feels clear, better than before, but I don't feel much otherwise." "What happened?" "You don't remember?" she asked, her tone slightly alarmed. "Only bits and pieces," I admitted. Before she could say more, a familiar voice interrupted. "Why don't I fill him in?" said the man I now recognized as the detective. Curly, still in his worn-out suit, sat down next to Nikki. "I'm Detective Tony Trenka. I'm handling your case," he said. "You were shot during a burglary when you came home from Dallas on Friday. You were stricken 3 times, in the chest and abdomen, by a man at the top of your stairs. Nikki found you and called emergency." He continued, explaining that I was lucky for 2 reasons. The shooter used a low-caliber tool, and Nikki arrived just in time to save me. I squeezed Nikki's hand, overwhelmed. "Do you know who did it?" I asked. "There have been a string of burglaries in your area, but no one's been shot until now. We're hoping the panic of the shooting left us some clues." Detective Trenka asked me what I remembered, but I could only recall seeing the man at the top of the stairs and his tool before I blacked out. "You'll probably remember more later," he reassured me. "I'll check in tomorrow." After he left, I turned to Nikki. "Thanks for saving my life." She teared up and kissed me. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she whispered. Then a terrible thought hit me. "Nikki, if I hadn't come home when I did, you might have been the one who walked in on them." Tears filled my eyes as the realization sank in. We held each other, both crying for a while. Eventually, I began to feel some pain, and a nurse came to give me something to help me sleep. When I woke up, Nikki was by the window reading. "What did they take?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she replied. "I haven't been back to the house since the shooting. The police are still investigating, and I couldn't bear to see it after what happened." "I understand," I said softly. "We'll figure it out when they finish." While Nikki was with me, we avoided talking about what happened on Friday. After she left that night, I lay in bed thinking about how close I'd come to losing everything, including her. It could have easily been Nikki who was shot instead of me. I tried to remember more details about the shooting, and something came to mind. I wasn't sure if it was accurate, but I hoped Detective Trenka would visit the next day so I could tell him. A nurse gave me something for pain, and I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little better, but still unable to move much. Nikki came in, kissed me, and said she had to go to work. She stayed until the doctor arrived. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked. "I'm okay, considering," I replied, asking why I couldn't move my arms or legs. "We had to immobilize you after surgery to prevent further injury," he explained. "Your injuries were serious, but you're lucky. The bullets missed vital organs." He added that I might be able to go home by Monday, and I wouldn't return to work for at least 3 weeks. After the doctor left, Nikki seemed relieved. She kissed me, promised to return by 4, and left for her meeting. Once alone, I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Later, a nurse came in and removed the restraints, giving me more mobility. I was watching pigeons outside when Detective Trenka appeared. "Feeling better?" he asked, sitting down. "I think so," I replied. "I remembered something last night. I think the shooter held the tool in his left hand and was wearing a black ring on his middle finger. Maybe onyx." "That's helpful," he said, jotting it down. "Knowing he's left-handed and wore an onyx ring is a good lead." We talked for a while, and I noticed he was still wearing the same suit. He explained it was his only one after losing all his clothes in a fire. Before leaving, Detective Trenka told me something chilling. The shooter didn't just think I was dead. He wanted me to die slowly. That's why he shot me in the stomach instead of the head. He promised to find out why. Afterward, he asked me more about my job and co-workers, hinting that someone I knew might be involved. Only after he left did I realize what he might be thinking. Over the next few days, I grew stronger, walking the hospital halls with help. Nikki visited every morning and came back after work for dinner, staying until visiting hours ended. Late at night, when I felt lonely, I'd call her, and we'd talk for over half an hour. As I recovered, I noticed Nikki wasn't doing as well. She looked pale, tired, and had lost weight. I hated knowing how much she had suffered, but I hoped she'd improve once we got home. At night, I thought about how we met in college. We'd first crossed paths at a party, but she didn't make much of an impression at the time. 2 weeks later, we met again, and this time she smiled. After that, we went on our first date, and by the end of the week, we were seeing each other exclusively. Thinking about those memories kept me going through my time in the hospital. Nikki and I had been married for 6 years, and the trip to Dallas had only been our second time apart. The first was when she took a group of students to Germany, and I had to miss it for a work conference. I missed her terribly, but when we reunited, I planned a romantic dinner and we spent a perfect evening together. Nikki even brought me a beautiful beer stein from Germany, a special addition to my collection. Her gift and the memory of that night reminded me how lucky I was to have her in my life. By Monday, I was ready to go home. Nikki had taken the day off and was there early to pick me up. As we drove away, she told me we'd be staying at her parents' house because our home hadn't been cleaned yet. A specialized cleaning crew was coming that day, and I insisted on being there to see what was missing for the insurance claim. On the way home, Nikki stayed quiet, clearly worried about how I'd react to the mess inside. Before we arrived, I told her it would be easier for me to enter through the front door, rather than struggle with the garage stairs. She helped me out of the car, and we slowly walked to the front door. As soon as I stepped inside, a metallic, coppery smell hit me, and I saw my small suitcase and a bag, both soaked in blood, along with a large, dried puddle on the floor. The sight and smell were overwhelming, and when Nikki came in, she ran to the bathroom to vomit. After she finished, I led her to the family room, trying to calm her down as we sat on the couch. Looking around, I noticed some things scattered on the floor and realized the beer stein Nikki had brought me from Germany was missing. Just as I started to think it might have been stolen, Nikki broke my thoughts. Apologizing for not being able to handle the blood, she insisted on making me lunch and getting me to bed, but I told her I wasn't ready for the stairs. I suggested she leave me a sandwich and go back to work so she wouldn't have to be there when the cleaners arrived. Though hesitant, she agreed, made me a sandwich, and left. The cleaners arrived an hour later, and after I let them in, they got to work on the bloodstains. While they worked, I checked the safe in the cabinet above the fireplace. Thankfully, nothing was missing or tampered with, and I felt relieved. I was too tired to clean up the rest of the room, so I rested on the couch. By the time Nikki returned, the house smelled of cinnamon, and the foyer was spotless. Despite the clean house, Nikki looked more stressed than ever. After a large glass of whiskey, she finally relaxed, but started crying, saying she just wanted it all to go away. I tried to comfort her, assuring her the police would catch the burglars, but it didn't seem to help. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in 2 weeks, though neither of us slept well. I kept waking up thinking I heard something, and every time Nikki was awake too. By Tuesday, things improved. I felt stronger, managed the stairs on my own, and had breakfast with Nikki before she left for work, while I stayed behind to clean the kitchen. Later that morning, Detective Trenka stopped by to check on me and ask about anything that was stolen. As we chatted, I brewed some coffee. "Did you make a list of what's missing?" he asked. "No, because nothing seems to be missing," I replied. "Really?" Trenka said, surprised. "I've been thinking there must have been at least 2 people involved," I said. Trenka, now asking me to call him Tony, encouraged me to share my theory. I explained how the mess downstairs suggested someone searched the first floor but left in a hurry after the shooting. I found it odd that they didn't take the TV or even try to open the safe. Tony agreed that the shots might have scared them off, but didn't want to rule out other possibilities. He accepted my offer for coffee, and we sat in the family room discussing the burglary. As I looked at the mess, I asked a question that had been bothering me. "Do you think the guy who shot me might come back?" "There's always a chance," Tony admitted, "but it's unlikely. He knows you didn't see his face, and returning would just increase his risk of getting caught." I mentioned Nikki's worry about the burglars returning, and Tony offered to increase patrols in our area. Grateful, I shifted the conversation, asking about his home life. Tony admitted his wife had forgiven him for a mistake, almost involving another woman, but they were doing better now. After Tony left, I spent the rest of the day cleaning up. While there wasn't much to tidy, I was still weak and had to move slowly. The hardest part was picking up the broken glass from the beer stein Nikki had brought me from Germany. It was the only thing that had been shattered, and it felt personal. Upstairs, I found that nothing had been disturbed. Nikki's jewelry was untouched, which led me to believe I must have interrupted the burglars before they could search the second floor. When Nikki came home that evening, the house was spotless. She scolded me for overexerting myself, but I assured her I felt fine. After dinner, she helped me to bed and changed my bandages, relieved that there was no sign of infection. Exhausted, I fell asleep during a gentle massage she gave me. The next morning, Nikki mentioned an open house at school. I encouraged her to go, even though I could see she was still worried about me. Before leaving for work, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," I replied. After Nikki left, the house felt too quiet. I wanted to do something but couldn't take on any physically demanding tasks after overexerting myself the day before. I promised both Nikki and myself to take it easy. I put on some music, kept the volume low, and started reading a Dean Koontz book I had recently bought. I read through the day, pausing only for lunch until Nikki came home. She was happy I hadn't pushed myself, but lightly scolded me for not taking a nap. After she left for the school open house, I tried watching TV but got bored of reruns. My thoughts drifted back to the burglary and shooting. Something felt off. How could the burglars leave without taking anything? And how did they get in? I decided to check the safe again. Going through its contents, I found something I missed the first time. 2 $300 American Airlines vouchers. The realization hit me hard. Annette. My mind raced, and I started to suspect Nikki had been involved. The thought that she could have been upstairs with the shooter when I was shot filled me with anger, but I knew I needed to stay calm and gather more information. I realized I couldn't confront Nikki yet. Instead, I called my best friend, Jim Culkin, a lawyer, and explained everything. He agreed to come by the next morning. After that, I called Detective Tony Trenka, asking him to come over that night at 9 o'clock because I had important information about the case. By the time Nikki returned at 8:50, I was making notes, planning what to do next. When she asked what I was writing, I told her it wasn't important and mentioned that Jim and Tony were coming over. Nikki looked surprised but curious about Jim. However, her tone shifted to concern when I mentioned Tony. She asked if they had caught the robber, and I told her we'd find out soon enough. Nikki went upstairs to change while I sat there, struggling to control my rising anger. I knew I had to stay calm until I heard what Tony and Jim had to say. Jim arrived right on time at 9 o'clock. As he walked in, he gave me a quick look, likely assessing my condition. Nikki came down and warmly greeted Jim, hugging him and kissing his cheek. Before we could talk much, the doorbell rang again, and Tony arrived. After introductions, Tony seemed curious about Jim's presence. "Jim's here as an observer," I said lightly. Tony didn't question it, and we all moved to the family room. I had coffee ready and Nikki helped serve it. Once we were seated, I asked Tony about the news he mentioned on the phone. Tony shared that the gang of robbers suspected in my shooting had been arrested that afternoon. However, his hesitation made it clear he had doubts. Sensing this, I pressed him. "Do you think they're the ones who shot me?" Tony paused but admitted, "I'm not sure." Before I could respond, Nikki grabbed my arm. "Do you know who shot you?" she asked, clearly anxious. I shook my head. "No, but I think I can help Tony figure it out." Jim leaned in, listening as I explained my suspicions. I told them about finding the American Airlines vouchers in the safe, and how my memories from that day were starting to come together. I explained that when I arrived home at 12:15, the first floor wasn't disturbed yet. The mess was created after I was shot, which suggested the burglars weren't downstairs when I got home. Nikki's face went pale as she listened. "Eric, what are you saying?" I told them that I believed the shooter was already upstairs when I arrived, and the scene downstairs was staged to look like a burglary afterward. I looked directly at Tony and said, "I think Nikki knows who shot me and why." Tony wasn't surprised. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said. "I'll need to take her in for questioning." I asked Tony to let Jim speak with Nikki first, since he was her lawyer. Tony agreed and left, saying that if Nikki didn't voluntarily go to the station, they'd issue a warrant. After Tony left, Jim reminded me that anything Nikki told him would be confidential. I assured him I understood, and that I just wanted her to have someone she trusted by her side. Jim then went to talk to Nikki privately while I waited upstairs. 20 minutes later, Jim called me down. He told me Nikki wanted to gather some clothes before leaving. While Jim went to his office, Nikki would pack her things upstairs. I wanted to ask if Nikki had agreed to cooperate with the police, but I knew I couldn't. Jim would tell me what he could, and the rest I would have to wait for. As Nikki packed upstairs, I sat at my desk, trying to process everything. Had I missed signs of trouble in our marriage? The idea of Nikki being involved with another man didn't make sense, but the evidence pointed that way. Tony had suspected it even before I did. Was Nikki having an affair? Did her lover shoot me? The thought that she waited 8 minutes before calling emergency haunted me. Was she hoping I wouldn't survive? I struggled to reconcile the loving wife I knew with what might have happened. It scared me that I might never know the full truth. I wiped away tears as Jim poked his head in. "Eric, we're leaving. You said you'd call Nikki's dad, right?" "Yeah, I'll call him soon," I replied. After Jim and Nikki left, I braced myself for the difficult conversation ahead. I called her father, George, and explained the situation, asking him to be there for her. George was shocked, insisting Nikki couldn't be involved, but I told him she'd be staying with him and Mary for a while. After the call, I sat at my desk, overwhelmed by everything. Thoughts raced through my mind. Did Nikki plan this? How long had the affair been going on? The idea that her lover shot me kept repeating in my head. To calm down, I took a painkiller and managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I felt lost. I was angry at Nikki, but missed her at the same time. The phone rang several times. Calls from her school, her mother, and some that left no messages. I wondered if one of the calls could have been from her lover. At 5 p.m., Tony called. I picked up and he asked how I was doing. After some small talk, he came over for a drink. Tony told me Nikki had cooperated with the police and was questioned for 2 hours before being released. He also revealed that they had identified the shooter but were waiting to arrest him when he returned from out of state. They didn't want to tip him off by arresting him too soon. While I felt some relief knowing the shooter had been identified, it hurt knowing they got the information from Nikki. Tony couldn't tell me more about her involvement, but the fact that she knew the shooter confirmed my worst fears. As we sat there, Tony suggested I get away for a while, maybe to the beach or Vegas. I agreed it was a good idea. "I'll call you if anything important comes up," Tony assured me before leaving. I decided a change of scenery might be exactly what I needed. Tony stayed for another hour just talking. At first, I thought he was fishing for information, but he genuinely wanted to chat. Before leaving, he took my cell number and asked me to let him know where I'd be staying. After he left, I considered where to go. Hawaii sounded great, but I didn't feel up for a long flight. Most places seemed either too far or not far enough. By the time I went to bed, I hadn't decided. Friday morning, I called my office. Everything was running smoothly without me, which was both a relief and a disappointment. My boss, Charlie, told me not to worry and to come back whenever I was ready. He asked how Nikki was coping, but I didn't mention her involvement in the shooting. Charlie suggested I go to Vegas to unwind, and when I hesitated, he offered his house there. He hadn't used it in a while and asked if I could check on it while I stayed. He even said I could use the old Honda in the garage and asked if I'd restock the fridge with some Heineken for his next visit. I accepted the offer, booked my flight for the next morning, and called Nikki's parents to let them know she could stop by the house for her things. Mary, her mom, begged me to talk to Nikki, but I couldn't. I was too angry. When Mary suggested we could work things out, I snapped, reminding her that Nikki's lover had shot me. After hanging up, I felt ashamed for how I'd spoken to her, but still didn't see how things could improve between Nikki and me. That evening, Charlie dropped off the keys to the Vegas house. When he mentioned that I'd like it, I awkwardly explained that Nikki wasn't coming. I asked him to keep my trip private, and he agreed. I called Tony to tell him about my Vegas plans. He warned me not to tell anyone where I was going until the shooter was in custody. Tony was still uneasy about the delay in arresting him and didn't want to take any risks. He also advised me not to talk to Nikki until things were sorted out. As we wrapped up the conversation, Tony mentioned that the ADA would question Nikki again soon and asked if I had anything that could help. I couldn't think of anything useful. Nikki had never given me any reason to suspect her before all this. Tony reassured me, reminding me that I needed to stay strong for what was coming next. Before he left, we acknowledged that we'd become friends through this ordeal, and despite everything, I appreciated having him on my side. We parted on a light note, joking about how having a cop as a friend might come in handy. After the conversation with Tony, I packed for my trip, keeping it light since I wasn't strong enough to carry heavy luggage. I packed a small bag with mostly socks, underwear, 3 pairs of pants, shorts, and 6 shirts. Since Charlie's house had a washer and dryer, I didn't need much, and if I needed anything else, I could buy it in Vegas. By 10:30 a.m. Saturday, I was in a cab heading west on Charleston Boulevard in 101-degree heat. Charlie had called his house small, but at 3,500 square feet, it was more elegant than I expected. It had white stucco, a red tile roof, and a grand entrance with red oak double doors and stained glass windows. Inside, everything was high-tech, with a smart home system controlling the air conditioning, security cameras, and more. The house lifted my spirits briefly. I thought, Nikki would love this. But the sadness and anger returned. I was here alone because of her. To distract myself, I decided to start the Honda in the garage and go grocery shopping. The car, though old, was in great condition and started right away. I remembered a nearby shopping center and bought enough food, drinks, and beer for a week. By the time I got back, I was exhausted, but managed to put the groceries away and eat a sandwich. I changed into swim trunks, checked my scars in the mirror, and felt self-conscious about them. To avoid the neighbors seeing them, I put on a shirt before heading outside, but the heat drove me into the pool anyway. After cooling off, I lay down on a lounge chair, nearly asleep, when my phone rang. "Eric," said the voice on the other end. "Hey, Tony, what's up?" I replied. "Good. I need to ask you a few questions if you don't mind." "Sure, go ahead," I said, a bit surprised he had more questions. "Tell me about Sarah Bowden," Tony asked. "Sarah Bowden? What does she have to do with this?" I responded, confused. "I was hoping you could tell me," Tony said. "She's a girl I knew in college." "You dated her?" Tony continued. "Yeah, we went out 3 or 4 times." "Did you have sex with her?" Tony asked bluntly. I felt irritation creeping in. "What's this about?" "It's just part of the investigation, so did you?" "No," I said firmly. "Is that why you stopped dating her? Because she didn't want to?" Tony pressed further. "No, it wasn't like that. We just realized it wasn't going anywhere, so we stopped seeing each other." "Did you stay in touch after that?" he asked. "We did for a bit, but nothing serious," I answered. "Why are you asking about someone I dated over 10 years ago?" I asked, frustration building. "Something came up in the investigation that I need to follow up on," Tony explained. "Were you dating your wife at that time?" he asked. "No, I hadn't met Nikki yet," I clarified. "Okay, tell me more about how you met Sarah," Tony urged. I took a deep breath, recalling the memory. "It was a Saturday night. I was getting gas when a car pulled up with a guy yelling at a girl. When I went inside to pay, the guy followed me. While he was inside, the girl got out and asked me to take her with me. She had a bruise on her face, so I told her to get in. We went to a Denny's and talked. She said the guy wasn't her boyfriend, just someone she had gone out with twice, and he'd hit her earlier that night." "Do you know who the guy was?" Tony asked. No, I don't remember if she ever told me his name, I said. Is there anything else you can tell me about Sarah? Tony asked, pressing for more information. No, I haven't heard anything about her since college, I replied, then paused as something resurfaced in my mind. Wait, Nikki asked me about her a year ago. Why did Nikki ask? Tony asked, sounding curious. I don't know, it was right after she got back from Germany. She just asked if I knew Sarah Bowden. And what did you tell her? Tony asked. I told her the truth, that I knew her from college. Did Nikki say why she was asking? He continued. She said someone told her to ask, but she didn't say who. Why was Nikki in Germany? Tony asked. She was chaperoning a school trip, I answered. Who else was on the trip? Tony pressed. I listed the other teachers and chaperones, and I noticed Tony's expression shift slightly. Why didn't you go? He asked. I had to cancel because of a work conference in Denver. Did Nikki ever mention Sarah again? Tony asked. No. That's it then? Tony asked, his voice calm. Yes, I hope so, I replied, feeling uneasy. What do you mean by that? I asked, picking up on his tone. I don't know if Sarah Bowden is involved, but it's a lead I need to follow, Tony said. I hope you've told me everything. Frustrated, I replied, Are you suggesting I'm hiding something? I thought we were friends. Eric, I *am* your friend, but I'm also a cop, and I have to do my job, Tony said firmly. Someone's trying to drag Sarah into this mess, and I don't see how she fits, I muttered. The rest of the weekend, I tried to relax, swimming, reading, and clearing my head. But Tony's questions about Sarah lingered. Why was she suddenly relevant? And what did Tony really suspect? On Monday, I decided to be more active. I walked 2 miles in the morning and swam laps in the afternoon, all while waiting for a call from Tony about my shooter being arrested. No call came. After lunch, I called Nikki's dad to check on her. Hey, George, how's Nikki doing? I asked. Did you know she quit her job? George replied, catching me off guard. She quit? Why? She was worried rumors would spread. But I think there's more to it, he said. Nikki loved teaching, so hearing this filled me with sadness and frustration. Tell her I'm sorry she had to quit, I said quietly before ending the call. I spent the rest of the day thinking about the odd questions Tony had asked me about Sarah Bowden, wondering how she was connected to this. By Wednesday morning, I still hadn't heard from Tony. Then Charlie called to check in. How's the house? He asked. It's great, but it's bigger than you made it sound, I joked. After some light chat, Charlie got serious. A police detective came by this morning asking about you. My stomach dropped. What did he want? He wanted to know where you were. I told him, Charlie said. Realizing I hadn't told Tony the exact location, I reassured Charlie that it was okay. We wrapped up the conversation, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That evening, I decided to head to Treasure Island Casino to distract myself. I played blackjack for a few hours and returned home around 9 p.m. I noticed a missed call and voicemail from Tony asking me to call back. I dialed him after finishing my sandwich. You wanted me to call? I asked. Where have you been? Tony snapped. I don't need to check in with you every hour, I replied, annoyed. Sorry, but we've got a problem. Our suspect didn't return from Denver. We lost him at LAX, Tony explained. I was stunned. So, the guy who shot me is still on the loose? Yeah, and we don't know if he knows we're looking for him, Tony said. Do you think Nikki tipped him off? I asked, feeling uneasy. We don't think so, but we're keeping an eye on her. How are you holding up? Tony asked. I'd feel better if you focused on catching him instead of asking about my past, I said, still irritated. Eric, you need to get out of that house, right now, Tony said suddenly, his tone urgent. Why? Do you think he's coming here? It's possible. He could already be there, Tony warned. I froze. Who is this guy? John Parker, Tony revealed after a pause. Nikki's gym teacher? I don't really know him, I said, shocked. There's more to their relationship than we know. We're still figuring it out, Tony said. Did Nikki tell you anything? I asked, fearing the worst. I can't share that yet, but you need to leave the house now. Call me once you're safe, Tony insisted. Realizing the flight from LA to Vegas only took an hour, I glanced around the dark house and agreed. Okay, I'm leaving, I said, hanging up. I closed my phone and started turning off the lights, leaving the house completely dark. I cautiously looked out the windows, scanning for any suspicious cars or people. Seeing nothing, I still couldn't shake the feeling that John Parker might be nearby. Grabbing the keys to Charlie's Honda, I went into the garage. Sitting in the driver's seat, I took a moment to calm myself before opening the garage door. Once it was open enough, I quickly backed out and closed it behind me. As I drove 2 blocks away, I checked my rearview mirror, but no cars seemed to be following. Approaching Charleston Boulevard, I noticed a silver Ford Explorer with California plates turning onto the street where Charlie's house was. The timing seemed too coincidental, and I didn't want to take any chances. I turned onto the I-15 interchange and decided to head back to Los Angeles. If John Parker was after me, I wasn't going to make it easy. The Honda held up well, cruising between 75 and 80 miles per hour all the way to the I-10. By 2:30 a.m., I was in Burbank, checking into a small hotel near the airport. Sitting in the dim hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking. Was John Parker after me? Was he still in Vegas or already in LA? The questions swirled in my head, and I couldn't figure out why Parker would want to eliminate me. If he and Nikki were involved, why not just get a divorce? I sat there, exhausted but unable to sleep. In the morning, I called Tony and told him where I was, mentioning the car with California plates. "What kind of car?" Tony asked. "A silver Ford Explorer," I replied. Tony's tone shifted. "That's probably his. We found out Parker parked his Explorer at LAX before flying to Denver. He was seen leaving the lot Sunday night." "So he's back in LA?" I asked. "Yes, we think so. Where are you?" "I'm at a hotel in Burbank, room 254, I said. 45 minutes later, Tony knocked on my door. He came in, opened his briefcase, and handed me a photo. "Do you recognize him?" Tony asked. I looked at the grainy image of a man with dark hair in the driver's seat of a car. He looked large but unfamiliar. "Is that John Parker?" I asked. "Yes," Tony confirmed. "I don't recognize him," I said. Tony then pulled out a videotape and placed it on the table. "You're not supposed to see this yet, but I thought you should. Don't tell anyone." "What's on it?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "You'll see," Tony said, leaving soon after. I called the front desk and asked for a VCR. When it arrived, I set it up and hesitated before pressing play. After a few moments of static, the screen showed Nikki and Jim sitting at a table in a gray room. Nikki's face was blank, her hands on the table. I recognized her outfit. It was from the night she left with Jim. This must have been recorded then. After a moment, the door to the left opened and a man in gray slacks and a white shirt entered. "Good evening, Mrs. Anderson. I'm Detective Harris, and I'll be conducting this interview. Before we start, do you need water or a bathroom break?" "No, I'm fine," Nikki replied in a weak monotone. "All right, let's begin," Harris said, settling into the chair across from her. "I want to talk about the events on Friday, August 8th. Please answer honestly." Nikki gave a slight nod. "Were you in the house when your husband was shot?" Harris asked. "Yes," Nikki responded quietly, her head lowered. "Who shot your husband?" "It was an accident," she whispered. "Who shot him?" Harris asked again, his tone firm. "John Parker," she admitted, and the name sent a chill down my spine. "Who is John Parker?" Harris pressed. "He's the gym teacher at my school," Nikki explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where were you when the shooting happened?" Harris continued. "I was hiding in the closet," Nikki replied. "How do you know it was an accident if you were in the closet?" Harris asked, his voice sharp. "John told me," Nikki answered. "Tell me what happened that day," Harris said, leaning forward. "John and I were upstairs in my bedroom. When we heard the front door open, I panicked because Eric wasn't supposed to be home yet. I picked up the phone to call emergency, but John told me to be quiet and went to check. He came back and said someone was downstairs, then told me to hide in the closet. A minute or two later, I heard fire shots. I thought someone had shot John, and I was terrified. Then John opened the closet door, and he looked shaken. He mumbled, 'It was an accident.' I followed him, and he said he thought he saw a tool in Eric's hand, so he panicked and shot him. That's when I saw Eric lying at the bottom of the stairs." Nikki paused, her tears threatening to spill over. "I told John to call emergency, but he said it was too late. Then he said we had to make it look like a robbery. While I was checking if Eric was still breathing, John started trashing the family room. I couldn't wait any longer and called emergency myself. I was put on hold," she said, her voice shaking. "What was Parker doing while you were on the phone?" Harris asked. "He just stood there, warning me to stick to the story. He said that if the police came after him, I'd go down with him," Nikki recalled, her face pale. "And what did Parker do next?" "Something strange. He leaned over Eric and whispered something. I think he said, 'It's for Sarah,' but I'm not sure," she admitted. "Who do you think Sarah is?" Harris asked. "Maybe Sarah Bowden, a girl Eric dated in college. John once asked me if Eric knew her," Nikki explained, glancing up briefly. Detective Harris jotted down Sarah Bowden's name before refocusing on Nikki. Now, tell me about your relationship with John Parker. He's just a colleague, Nikki said, her tone growing defensive. Then why was he in your bedroom? Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. He followed me upstairs, Nikki admitted, her voice faltering again. Why was he at your house that day? Harris pressed. We had lunch with some teachers, and I went home to change after spilling sauce on my blouse. He drove with me, Nikki explained, her voice barely steady. So he followed you upstairs? Harris asked, pushing for clarity. Yes, but only because he was carrying a beer mug he bought for me in Germany, she responded. Why bring the mug upstairs? Harris asked, clearly confused. He said it was to remind me of something from Germany. He tried to seduce me, Nikki confessed, her tears finally breaking free. Did you have sex with him? Harris asked, his voice firm. No, I didn't, Nikki replied, her tone resolute. Was that because your husband came home and interrupted? Harris asked, leaning in. No, Nikki insisted, shaking her head. Then why did Parker think you would agree? Harris pressed. He kept bringing up Germany, trying to convince me, trying to manipulate me, Nikki replied, her voice cracking. Was there any reason he thought you would? Harris asked, his tone becoming sharper. Nikki was visibly upset, and her lawyer, Jim, tried to comfort her as Harris continued his interrogation. In just a couple of seconds, I realized it was an earthquake. I quickly stepped back to the bathroom doorway, bracing myself. It felt strong, maybe a magnitude 6. The large window cracked and flew out, landing in the parking lot below. The power went out moments later. It all lasted under 30 seconds, but the sounds of sirens and car alarms soon echoed throughout the city. I waited for the power to return, but as the darkness deepened, I unplugged the VCR and took it to the front desk. My tape's stuck. Can I borrow the VCR and return it tomorrow? I asked. The clerk pointed to a lit area. We have a generator. You can use the outlets to get your tape out. 5 minutes later, I had the tape and was driving home. I called Tony. I'm heading to the house. The power's out here too, I said. Good. I need to talk to you. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes, Tony replied. The house was pitch dark when I arrived. I turned off the car's headlights, grabbed the videotape, and stumbled toward the front door. It was so dark I could barely see, tripping a few times. At the door, I knelt to find the keyhole by feel, mumbling to myself, I can't see a thing. Oddly, closing my eyes helped, and I managed to unlock the door. Inside, it was even darker. I knew the flashlight was in the kitchen pantry, so I moved slowly along the walls, trying to reach it. Suddenly, something felt off. I froze. There was a strange odor, sweat and whiskey. Someone's here, I whispered. Fear gripped me. Could it be Parker? My mind raced. If it was, he'd used the power outage to sneak in. I had to get the flashlight. Moving slowly and quietly, I inched my way toward the pantry. When I finally reached it, relief washed over me. But just as I reached for the door, I felt a warm breath on my face. Hey, Eric, Parker's voice growled, inches from me. My whole body tensed, his sour breath reeked of whiskey. Without thinking, I shoved him and stepped aside. He staggered, caught off guard, and a fire shot rang out, the flash blinding me and the sound deafening. I managed to slip inside the pantry as more fire shots followed. Frantically, I found the flashlight on the top shelf, clutching it tightly as I hid in the corner. Eric, why are you making this hard? Parker taunted. I've waited a long time for this. Just face it like a man. I stayed quiet, trying to control my anger as he continued mocking me. Nicole and I will celebrate your pass away, he sneered. Rage surged, but I knew I had to stay in control. Then in a calmer voice, Parker added, You know, Nicole came to my hotel in Germany. She wanted me. His words stung, but I held my composure. Parker leaned against the pantry door. Eric, where are you? He called out mockingly. She wanted me to eliminate you so we could be together. That was the final straw. I charged at the door, knocking Parker forward. We crashed into the dining room table, both struggling for control. I managed to lock his right arm down, forgetting he was left-handed. Suddenly, his left elbow slammed into my side, sending waves of pain through me. I swung the flashlight blindly, striking him hard. He screamed in pain as the flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling across the floor. Parker groaned, but didn't stay down. He hissed through clenched teeth. You're going to pay for this, Eric. Grabbing my phone, I quickly called Tony. Parker's here. Hurry, I shouted. Parker sneered. Help won't come in time. Nicole and I will be laughing in Rio. An idea hit me. I whispered, Sarah told me she didn't want you because you were terrible in bed. Shut up about Sarah! Parker exploded. The room plunged into darkness again as the phone's light went out. Parker made his move, throwing me across the room and scrambling to find his tool. I stayed low, knowing the next shot would eliminate me. Suddenly, the room filled with bright police flashlights. Parker raised his tool, but before he could fire, 3 shots rang out, and he slumped to the ground. Officers rushed in, disarming him. "He's alive," one officer confirmed. Tony rushed over. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks for saving me." "Who shot him?" I asked, still in shock. "All of us," Tony replied. By the time Parker was taken away in the ambulance, I had already explained what happened to 3 different detectives, each reminding me how lucky I was, as if I didn't already know. Most of the police had left, and Tony and I sat in the family room. "I don't get why Parker decided to liquidate me," I said, still shaken. Tony thought for a moment. "It was an obsession. He felt you took something that belonged to him and wanted revenge." "It wasn't about Nikki, was it?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "No," Tony confirmed. "He used her to get to you." "Was it Sarah Bowden?" Tony nodded gravely. "Yes, her name came up during Nikki's interrogation, so I tracked her down. She's married now and living in Phoenix. I spoke to her before coming here." "What did she say?" I asked, feeling a sense of unease. Tony sighed. "She confirmed she knew you and told me the same story you did, about dating briefly. Then I asked her about Parker. She hesitated before telling me that John was the guy she was with the night you met her at the gas station. After that night, they didn't see each other for months, but eventually he contacted her. He apologized and asked to talk. Unfortunately, she made the mistake of letting him into her apartment. At first, he was polite, but then he got angry and told her she belonged to him. When she tried to call the police, he threatened her, saying that if he ever saw her with someone else, he'd liquidate them both. I absorbed the weight of Tony's words. And she didn't think it applied to me. She wasn't seeing anyone at the time, so she didn't think it was directed at you, Tony explained. And she moved to Phoenix after that. Yes, she left school hoping he wouldn't find her, Tony said. I let out a slow exhale. And she's safe now? As far as I know, yes, Tony replied. I stared at the floor, processing everything. What about Parker? Will he survive? Tony's expression turned serious. His chances are slim. He was already in a coma when they took him. I didn't know how to feel. Maybe relieved, but definitely not happy. Tony interrupted my thoughts. Sorry, but your house is a crime scene again. You'll need to leave everything as it is for now, but it shouldn't take long. Internal Affairs will be here tomorrow since officers were involved in the shooting. Do I have to leave? I asked, dreading the idea of finding a hotel. No, just don't touch anything in the kitchen. You'll probably get your house back by noon tomorrow, Tony assured me. Did you finish watching the video? He asked, referring to the footage he'd given me. No, the earthquake interrupted me, I replied. Tony chuckled softly. Right, I forgot about that. Just don't tell anyone I gave you a copy. When you're done, get rid of it. I looked at him, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. What's going to happen to Nikki? Tony sighed deeply. I don't know. That's up to the prosecutor. If she told the truth, maybe she won't be charged. We stood up, and Tony reached for his coat. I'll let you know if I hear anything more about your wife. Thanks, Tony. I owe you a whiskey, I said, attempting a small smile. At least 2, he grinned before walking out the door. Alone in the family room, Parker's words echoed in my mind. Could any of it be true? Nikki had mentioned the beer glass from Germany, but had she been involved with him? I wanted to believe otherwise, but doubts crept in. Too exhausted to watch the rest of the video, I decided to sleep. My dreams were restless, filled with the chaos of the past few weeks. The next morning, the doorbell woke me. 2 men in brown suits introduced themselves as detectives from Internal Affairs. We're here to inspect the scene of the shooting, one of them said. Has anything been touched in the kitchen? No, I replied. After recounting the events once more, they inspected the scene while I took a shower. When I returned, they were finishing up. You can clean up now, one of them said before leaving. I called a cleaning service, but they wouldn't arrive until Monday. That was fine. I needed time to think. Around 11, the power came back on. I sat down to watch the rest of Nikki's interview, but the videotape was gone. I searched everywhere, even checking my car, but couldn't find it. Panic set in. Had I dropped it when I pushed Parker? Maybe Internal Affairs had taken it, thinking it was evidence. I realized I needed to warn Tony just in case. The rest of the day felt empty. Without the tape, I didn't know what to do. The house was quiet and I felt completely alone. Despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about Nikki. Could we move past this? That evening, Tony stopped by. After pouring us both drinks, he told me Parker had died that afternoon. I wasn't sure how to react. Relief, maybe, but uncertainty lingered. Tony continued. The ADA isn't pressing charges against Nikki. She cooperated fully, passed a polygraph, and they believe she told the truth. I nodded, though I still didn't know what I would do about Nikki. Tony stood up to leave. Take your time, but don't punish her for something that wasn't her fault. The next morning, I drove to Nikki's parents' house. George greeted me warmly, and inside I found Nikki looking exhausted and tearful. I was so worried, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, I said. I wasn't ready to talk yesterday. Did you know Parker died? I asked quietly. Nikki nodded, her tears flowing freely. I'm not crying for him, Eric. I'm crying for what he did to us. Before I could respond, Mary spoke up. Eric, the district attorney's office called yesterday. They said they're not pressing charges against Nikki. I nodded and glanced at Nikki. Yeah, I heard. That's good news, right? Mary asked hopefully. It is, I agreed. But I wasn't sure what it meant for us. Nikki walked over to me and asked quietly, Can I go home with you? I shook my head, feeling torn. No, I'm not going home right now. She looked confused. Where are you going? I have to take Charlie's car to Las Vegas, I replied. Nikki blinked. But Charlie lives in Sherman Oaks. Why do you need to take his car to Vegas? I cupped her face gently and looked into her eyes. I'll explain everything on the way. I want you to come with me. Nikki wiped her tears and hugged me tightly. I turned to her father. George, I need a favor. Some cleaners are coming to the house on Monday. Can you let them in? Of course, George said. What time? Around noon, I said. Nikki and I should get going. As we left, Nikki said, We need to stop by the house so I can pack. I already packed what you'll need, I replied. She looked surprised. So you knew you'd be taking me with you? You're my wife. Why would I leave without you? I kissed her forehead. For the first 45 minutes of the drive, Nikki was quiet. Then she asked, Did you really pack all my clothes? I packed the essentials, underwear, sandals, heels, and that black dress you like. We can buy anything else, I said. She smiled and kissed my cheek, and we started talking like we used to. But after a while, I noticed Nikki grew somber. What's wrong? I asked. Eric, I'm sorry for everything. I want you to know I love you and that nothing happened between John and me. I just hope you don't lose trust in me because of this. Please ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth. I paused, then asked, Did you break the beer glass? Nikki looked confused, but nodded. Yes, I did. I already figured that out, I said. Nikki looked relieved. I love you, Eric. I trust you, and I just want to move forward. Let's spend these next few days together without worrying about anything. When we arrived at Charlie's house in Vegas, Nikki said, This is much better than staying on the Strip. We spent the day lounging by the pool, and Nikki made a simple but romantic dinner. It felt like we were reconnecting, but I knew readers might wonder how I could trust her again. After the investigators left the house on Friday, I found a videotape in the pantry, which turned out to be Nikki's police interview. I watched the part where Detective Harris asked about John Parker trying to seduce her. Nikki explained that they were in Germany as chaperones, and on the last day of the trip, John gave her the beer mug she had admired. He said it was a thank you, and even though she knew she shouldn't accept it, she did, because she thought I'd like it. Later, after a night of drinking, John kissed her, and for a moment, she kissed him back. Realizing her mistake, she pushed him away and told him it was inappropriate. She ended it right there. That was the truth I needed to hear. Did Mr. Parker leave you alone after that? Detective Harris asked, his voice steady. Pretty much. The next day he apologized and blamed it on drinking too much the night before. After that he behaved, Nikki replied quietly. So you didn't have sex with Mr. Parker? Harris pressed. No, I love my husband and would never cheat on him, Nikki said firmly. When you got home, what did you tell your husband about the beer mug Mr. Parker gave you? Harris continued. I didn't tell Eric it was from John. I said I bought it myself. When Eric loved the mug, I felt guilty for lying and almost told him the truth, but I didn't, she admitted. Did Mr. Parker ever ask you to have an affair after that trip? Harris asked. He flirted sometimes, but he never crossed a major line, at least not until the day of the shooting, Nikki responded, her voice trembling. Why do you call it an accident? Mr. Parker deliberately shot your husband, Harris said, his tone hardening. No, I don't believe he would have done that on purpose, Nikki said, tears welling up as she began to sob. Mrs. Anderson, did you hear gunshots when you were hiding in the closet? Harris asked, pressing further. Yes, she whispered. Can you describe what you heard? The first shot was loud, and then there were 2 quieter shots after a pause, Nikki said, her voice shaking. Do you know why there was a delay between the shots? Harris asked, his brow furrowing. No, I never thought about it, she replied, shaking her head. Mr. Parker shot your husband in the chest, then came down the stairs and shot him 2 more times. It's clear he wanted your husband dead, Harris stated bluntly. Nikki broke down, and Jim reached out to comfort her. After a brief pause, Harris continued. Can you think of any reason why Mr. Parker would want to kill your husband? Nikki shook her head, her voice barely audible. I don't understand why he'd do it. Is there anything else that might explain why he shot your husband? Harris asked, his tone probing. Nikki hesitated, then said, Maybe it has to do with Sarah Bowden. Why do you think that? Harris asked, leaning in slightly. While we were in Germany, John asked me to ask Eric if he remembered Sarah Bowden, but he didn't explain why, Nikki replied. Did you ask your husband about her? Yes, Eric said he knew her briefly in college. Did you tell your husband that Mr. Parker asked about her? Harris pressed further. No, Nikki admitted. Why not? Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. I don't know, she answered, looking down. Did you see Mr. Parker after the shooting? Harris asked, shifting the conversation. Yes, at the hospital once. He said he needed to talk to me and check on Eric, Nikki said, her voice soft. And what did he want to talk about? Harris inquired. He wanted to make sure I didn't tell anyone what really happened, Nikki confessed, her voice cracking as she spoke. Detective Harris ended the interview, and Nikki left with Jim. As I finished watching the tape, I still had doubts about Nikki. Later that evening, Tony came over and told me the DA wasn't pressing charges. I asked why, and Tony explained that Nikki had passed a polygraph test, confirming her truthfulness. Nikki hadn't had an affair with Parker, and the beer mug was Parker's misguided attempt to pursue her. When I found out that Nikki had broken the mug, it made sense. She probably smashed it because it reminded her of the guilt she felt over the situation. That was the final piece of the puzzle I needed. If Nikki broke the glass, I could move forward. If Parker had done it, my doubts would remain.